Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the powdered, perfumed and politically perilous world of Marie Antoinette. Yes, that Marie Antoinette. Before she became the Queen of France, or the scapegoat of a revolution, depending on whom you ask, she was just a girl growing up in one of Europe's most overachieving families, and tonight you're going to live her life. But fair warning, you probably won't survive this. The court is brutal, the wigs are heavy, and the people are sharpening their pitchforks even as you're picking out your next embroidered corset. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, what city are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's November 2nd, 1755. And you're born into the grand, humming halls of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. The smell of wax-polished mahogany, freshly scrubbed limestone and courtly perfume lingers in the air. Outside, the city is in a mild panic over a massive earthquake that just struck Lisbon, but inside, your arrival causes a much more dignified kind of stir. You're Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa and Emperor Francis the Woo. Yes, 15th. And no, you're not the favourite. But you're cute enough to be loved, and that's already a win in this family. You grow up in a world of opera lessons, tight corsets, and etiquette drills so strict they make modern military boot camps look like yoga retreats. Your mother, Maria Theresa, is a powerhouse. Think of her as the ultimate multitasker, running a continent-spanning empire while also micromanaging her children's handwriting. Your dad, he's charming, kind and mostly ornamental. A sparkly belt to her military jacket. You like him more than her, which you'll later come to understand is a bit of a theme in your life. Your childhood days blur into a series of stiff portraits, harpsichord recitals, and carefully arranged tea parties where you practice the art of smiling without showing too many teeth. As you get older, meaning like 10, you start to notice that you're being inspected, groomed, lined up like a delicate chess piece waiting to be moved for dynastic gain. Because you're not just a daughter, you're a future alliance, a future queen possibly, definitely someone's problem. You're taught French early, not well mind you, but enough to flirt your way through court introductions, and you study Catholic doctrine like it's a royal duty, because it is. You're Habsburg after all, and that means your faith, your bloodline, and your waistline must all be unimpeachable. But secretly you'd rather be outside. You like dancing, you like sweets, you like sneaking away from your governess to play with your sisters and laugh until your sides ache. You're a girl first and a political pawn second, though that order won't last. By age 12, the world around you begins to shift. France, once a bitter rival of Austria, is now a potential friend, if the alliance can be sealed with the right marriage, and you, sweet little Maria Antonia, are chosen as the human handshake. Your mother, ever the strategist, arranges your betrothal to Louis Auguste, the awkward, shy grandson of the French king. You're told he's the future of France. You're told it's a great honour. You're not told he collects locks, loves hunting more than people, and has the libido of a frightened dormouse. But all in good time. At 13, you're introduced to the concept of transformation. Not the fun Disney kind, but the diplomatic rebranding kind. Your teeth are fixed, some pulled, some filed, to meet French standards. Your tutors are replaced with French ones who immediately inform you that your grammar is tragic. Your wardrobe is slowly redesigned to scream French Dauphine rather than Austrian spare daughter. You spend your days rehearsing curtsies and your nights dreaming of what life in France might actually look like. Romantic novels sneak onto your nightstand. You imagine candlelit palaces and balls that last until morning. You don't imagine the loneliness. In April 1770, the carriage is prepared. You say goodbye to your sisters, your friends, and your dog. You're 14. You cross the border into France, where, in a ceremonial exchange on a small island in the Rhine, you're stripped of every item you brought from home, even your underwear. It's all replaced with French garments, French jewellery, French everything. This is not subtle. This is diplomacy by costume change. You ride onward toward Versailles, the gleaming, surreal palace of your new life. As you enter, the scale of it hits you. It's not just grand, it's overwhelming. Marble, gold leaf, mirrors that stretch for what seems like miles. The air smells like roses and gossip. People bow, but they also stare. You're both exotic and expected. A foreigner and a future queen. That night you meet your fiancé. Louis Auguste is pale, clumsy, and completely uninterested in this entire affair. He mumbles. He avoids eye contact. He is nothing like the princes in your stories. You smile anyway, you have to, because this is no longer a fantasy. This is your job now. Welcome to Versailles. Historically, there's a strange and somewhat charming footnote here. Louis was reportedly obsessed with locksmithing, as in literal keys. He'd spend hours tinkering with locks and mechanisms, which, metaphorically, is almost too on the nose for what happens next in your marriage. Let's just say the bedroom situation becomes a topic, a very public one. Scholars still debate whether you were truly unprepared for your role or simply underestimated. Some argue that the Austrians didn't do enough to educate you for French court life. Others think the problem was never your education, but the weight of anti-Austrian sentiment and gendered expectations you were up against. Regardless, you're here now, and the game has begun. And so, your life in France begins. Not with a triumph, but with a tense curtsy. The palace waits. The court watches. The world whispers. You wake to the sound of bells and the rustling of too many people trying to make your life look effortless. You're barely 15, and already there's a servant buttoning your gown, another tying ribbons into your hair, and yet another quietly reminding you which fork to use for which course at the formal breakfast. Versailles doesn't allow for quiet mornings or privacy. Here, even brushing your teeth is a public event, though they call it a tooth powder ceremony, and you're expected to smile the whole way through it. Today, you're officially becoming the Dauphine of France. Not quite queen, but close enough that everything you do already sparks commentary. People analyse your posture, your French accent, the way you laugh. You feel like a character someone else is playing, and yet you're the one wearing the corset. They tell you you're charming, that your skin is luminous and your dancing is delightful, but underneath all that praise is a simmering resentment, because you are not French. You're Austrian. And France hasn't quite forgotten the centuries of blood and bad alliances that came before your arrival. Your wedding takes place in May 1770, and it is, let's not sugarcoat it, a public spectacle. Over 5,000 guests, a cathedral that smells like candle wax and expectations. You wear white satin embroidered with silver, and a huge glittering tiara that digs into your scalp. As you and Louis Auguste kneel before the Archbishop, you sneak glances at him. His cheeks are flushed. He looks like he'd rather be dissecting a lock than marrying a girl. Later that night, you're escorted to the marital bed in front of a crowd of onlookers, because yes, that's a thing here. Nobles cram into your bedchamber to witness the start of your royal wedded life, as if the pressure of producing an heir isn't already thick enough to choke on. Louis joins you. You both smile, and then nothing happens. The next morning, there are whispers. Then weeks pass. Then months. People begin to speculate. Maybe you're frigid. Maybe he's impotent. Maybe you both just hate each other. The truth? It's painfully simple. You're kids. He's awkward. You're terrified. And no one has explained the mechanics of anything beyond how to sit gracefully and keep a straight spine. No one wants to acknowledge that the two of you are just lost. Behind closed doors, Louis is kind but distant. He prefers hunting and locksmithing to court life, and while you try to play the part of a devoted wife, your heart isn't in it. You miss Vienna. You miss being a person instead of a symbol. You write long letters to your mother, who responds with bullet-pointed disappointment and suggestions on how to encourage your husband. Her tone is always imperial, never maternal. Versailles itself is a theatre. The rooms smell of incense and sweat masked by orange blossom. The walls are gilded, but the plumbing is medieval. Your days are a cycle of dressing rituals, awkward meals, and never-ending scrutiny. The courtiers smile to your face and roll their eyes behind fans. Every move you make is recorded by someone. When you trip on your skirts, it ends up in a letter to someone's cousin in Lyon. You try to keep your spirits up. You throw yourself into music, dancing, and eventually fashion, where you can control at least one piece of your life, You ditch the rigid formal dresses in favour of lighter fabrics and pastel silks. You smile more. You flirt a little, though never too far. You're learning to survive this place one stifling room at a time. But the pressure to consummate the marriage only grows. Jokes are made in court plays. Pamphlets circulate with crude cartoons of you and Louis failing to perform your duty. It's humiliating. Worse, it's political. Because without a child, you're nothing but a foreign ornament, expendable. Every month that passes without a pregnancy chips away at your image. Quirky detail time. Here's one. Louis may have suffered from phimosis, a condition that could have made intercourse painful or difficult. It's debated whether he ever had the surgery to correct it. Some say he eventually did and things improved. Others suggest the real issue was psychological, a potent cocktail of anxiety, religious guilt, and zero chemistry. Either way, the result is the same. Awkward silence and public disappointment. Years pass. You're still childless, still Austrian, still the punchline in court gossip. Meanwhile, France is simmering. Grain prices are rising and the people are restless. But at Versailles, you're encouraged to ignore all that. Focus on your embroidery, your next ball, your posture. Historians still argue about what kind of political influence you had during these early years. Some think you were a pawn, pushed around by the older courtiers and your formidable mother-in-law. Others suggest you had more agency than you let on, subtly building your own circle of influence and learning to navigate court politics with surprising skill. Either way, the court sees what it wants to see. A foreign bride who can't produce an heir. But you're not done. Not yet. Despite the rumours, the snickering, and the quiet despair behind your closed doors, you keep showing up. You keep smiling. Because even though you're only 16, you're already learning that royalty isn't about comfort. It's about endurance. And nobody endures like a Habsburg. The sun rises over Versailles in a pale golden sweep, filtering through silk drapes that cost more than some villages. You're already awake, lying in a bed that's too big and too cold, wondering, again, if today will be different. Will Louis look at you with something other than vague politeness? Will someone at court say your name without attaching a snide comment to it? Will you finally feel like you belong here, not just live here? Spoiler, no, not today. Versailles isn't just a palace, it's a theatre of power, and you're centre stage whether you want to be or not. Every hallway smells like a mix of lavender oil and aging candle wax. Every floorboard creaks in the same accusatory rhythm. There are rules for how to walk, when to speak, how to sneeze. And then there's etiquette, which feels less like manners and more like a 400-page novel written by someone who hates joy. You learn quickly that being royal in France is a full-time performance, and no one claps at the end. Your day begins with the lever, the official waking ceremony where dozens of nobles file into your room just to watch you be helped out of bed. Yes, watched. You go from nightgown to corset to full gown like a living doll, and every part of the process is an opportunity for someone to curry favour or whisper about your figure. You're 15, and your body is a political subject. The servants tighten your corset until you can barely breathe, lace up your shoes, and pin your hair just so. You're not dressing for comfort. You're dressing to symbolise the monarchy. No pressure. Your movements through the palace are tracked like a prize deer's. You glide through marble halls lined with mirrors, each one reflecting not just your image, but a million expectations. At meals, you dine in public under the pretense of accessibility, as if the average Parisian would be comforted by watching you eat swan pâté with a gold spoon. Every bite is a performance, every sip a symbol. You can't even scratch your nose without someone writing home about it. Despite the suffocating routine, you do find small rebellions. You start redesigning your rooms with lighter colours and simpler furniture. You laugh a little too loudly at court performances. You even, scandalously, walk in the gardens without a full entourage. But it's your taste in fashion that really sets the palace on fire. You abandon the towering stiff court gowns for softer muslin dresses and pastel silks that flutter when you walk. Your hair grows taller by the month, sculpted into fantastic shapes, ships, gardens, even a globe once. The public loves it, then they hate it, then they love it again. It's a cycle that becomes very familiar. The truth is, you're lonely. You try to make friends, but Versailles friendships are like dessert, beautiful, fleeting, and hollow in the middle. The ladies around you are mostly spies in silk. They report your every word, every facial expression back to their families or factions. You trust a few, like the Princess de Lamballe, whose loyalty seems real, but even that carries risk. Get too close to anyone, and suddenly you're accused of secret alliances, or worse, secret affairs. One of your greatest comforts becomes the Petty Trianon, a small palace gifted to you by Louis. Finally, something that feels like yours. It's charming, far from the stifling main court, and you decorate it with your own taste. Simple, elegant, less theatrical. It becomes your retreat, a sanctuary of pastels and privacy. But of course, even this is controversial. People say you're playing at being a peasant while real peasants starve. They say you're mocking the people. They say you're building a separate court of favourites, out of touch with reality. You just wanted a garden where you could hear yourself think. Ironically, the king, your husband, is growing a little fonder of you, now that you've stopped trying so hard to win him over. Maybe it's maturity. Maybe it's your mutual disinterest finally morphing into camaraderie. You bond over shared responsibilities, over the tedious reality of being young rulers stuck in the world's most gilded fishbowl. Eventually, after 7 years of awkward silences and dashed hopes, something shifts in your marriage. The physical side of things finally clicks, or at least stumbles into functional territory. In 1778, at long last, you give birth to a daughter, Marie Thérèse. Cue the fireworks. You've done it. You've proven yourself, at least temporarily. The court beams. Paris breathes. Your mother writes a barely warm congratulatory letter that includes detailed instructions on how to produce a son next time. Classic Maria Theresa. And then things start to change. You're now not just a consort, but a mother. The people look at you differently. There's more respect, but also more pressure. Your role has expanded, not eased, and with that comes a strange creeping feeling. You're being watched more closely than ever. That low buzz of resentment in Paris? It's getting louder. You can't quite hear the words yet, but the tone is unmistakable. Here's a curious side note. Many believe the French were less angry about your spending than about the symbolism of it. The fact that while the country teetered on financial ruin, you wore diamonds and hosted masked balls wasn't just seen as frivolous, it was interpreted as an insult. And you just wanted to feel alive. You didn't grow up poor. You didn't know what starvation looked like. You only knew how to entertain, how to dazzle, how to survive in a system where being boring meant being irrelevant. But the press doesn't print nuance, it prints caricatures. The public begins to paint you as something between a villain and a cartoon. Madame Deficit, they call you, a spender of fortunes, an enemy of the people. You're on pamphlets, usually naked, often doing unspeakable things with courtiers or foreign agents. Never mind that the king spends just as much, or that you've started quietly cutting back. The image sticks. Modern. Historians go back and forth on how much you actually spent. Some suggest your expenses were typical for a queen, while others admit you enjoyed excess but were unfairly scapegoated. But one thing is agreed on. Perception mattered more than reality. And the perception of you? It's beginning to rot. Still, in these early years you do find pockets of real joy. Your children, music. Even Louis starts to grow into his role, clumsily but sincerely. You attend operas. You ride horses through misty meadows in the early dawn. You laugh at jokes about yourself sometimes. You try. But Versailles never lets you forget. This is not your home. It never will be. The wind whispers through the Versailles gardens, brushing over perfectly trimmed hedges and marble statues that never blink, never age, never question. You envy them a little. It's now 1778, and the air around you is thicker with gossip than perfume. You've given birth to a daughter finally, and while the court offers you polite applause, there's a very specific type of disappointment hanging in the drapes. She's not a son, not an heir, not what they were all waiting for. Still, you try to enjoy her. Marie-Thérèse is warm and squirmy and full of tiny yawns and soft mewing cries. You cradle her in your arms with a reverence no one taught you but somehow feels ancient. You whisper lullabies in bad French, smuggle her sweets, and even, shocking to your nurses, insist on seeing her when you're not scheduled to. The other mothers at court pretend to be appalled. Secretly, they're fascinated. Your bond with your daughter stirs something in you. the first time you feel like your body did something right, not as a political instrument, but as a human being. That rare moment of self-worth flickers, but never quite ignites. Because of course, behind every joy at Versailles lurks 1,000 opinions and a few hundred insults tucked inside powdered smiles. You're still the Austrian woman, the foreigner who can't seem to play by the right rules. And let's talk about Louis. Since the marital engine finally kicked on, things have become less strained between you two. You're not in love, not in the storybook sense, but there's an understanding now. He's awkward, deeply introverted, and far more comfortable discussing keyholes than feelings. But he tries in his own bumbling way. He gives you the Petty Trianon. He lets you make your own decisions there. It feels like a truce. A soft détente between two people who were never given the chance to choose each other. In the Petty Trianon, you build your dream, a world without protocol. You wear flowing cotton dresses, play music, garden with your hands, yes, real dirt under your royal fingernails. You even construct a faux village, the Hameau de la Reine. It's part farm, part fantasy, where you and your friends can pretend to be milkmaids and shepherdesses. Of course, the sheep are perfumed and the milk is delivered, in crystal pitchers, but hey, details. It's a fantasy, not a revolution. But the fantasy draws fire. Outside your circle, people hear about your peasant cosplay and see only mockery. In a France where bread costs more than most people make in a week, the queen playing farm girl is the kind of image that sticks. Like gum on a silk slipper, they say you're delusional, cruel, a parody of privilege. You tell yourself it's just court venom, but you're wrong. Still, you cling to your pleasures. You immerse yourself in fashion, pushing the boundaries of royal dress until you look more like a high-end Parisian doll than a queen. Your portrait is everywhere. Pale cheeks, a slight pout, a dress made of clouds. You become a trend, a brand. Women copy your look, merchants name hats after you, and silk weavers in Lyon depend on your next hemline to keep food on their tables. You're not just a queen, you're an industry. But fame, as you're beginning to learn, is a fickle friend. The more visible you are, the more vulnerable you become. And then, in 1781, a miracle, or so they call it, your son is born, Louis Joseph, the long-awaited heir. The court erupts, the church bells ring, the people cheer, at least for a moment. You've done it. You've secured the succession. You think maybe they'll love you now. They don't. If anything, the hatred sharpens. The more you succeed, the more the public resents you, because you're not one of them, and you never will be. The pamphlets get nastier. Political cartoons show you drowning in gold, trampling on the poor, having affairs with everyone from the Swedish ambassador to your own brother-in-law. A favourite trope? You're shown whispering poison into the king's ear, dragging France down with your foreign tongue. One of the more unhinged but oddly popular theories claims you're secretly sending French secrets back to Vienna. There's zero evidence, of course, but evidence doesn't sell newspapers. Scandal does. One of the quieter ironies here is that you're not actually that politically active, at least not in these early years. You don't care about statecraft. You care about your children, your music, your clothes, and maybe a certain Swedish nobleman who keeps showing up with heartbreak in his eyes, but we'll get to him later. Still, people need a villain. And you, with your porcelain skin, your Austrian accent, and your feathered hats that could double as stage sets, you're perfect for the role. Historically, this is where things get complicated. Some scholars argue that you were a victim of misogyny and xenophobia, that your every action was interpreted through a lens of suspicion because you dared to have influence. Others suggest you were tragically tone-deaf, insulated by luxury and incapable of seeing the storm on the horizon. And maybe both are true. Maybe you were naive and scapegoated, human, in other words. Which is not a trait anyone wants in a monarch. Meanwhile, France is cracking. The country is in debt, the winters are harsh, the people are starving, and the king, well, he's not exactly known for strong leadership. Louis is kind but indecisive. He waffles, he dithers, he tries to fix the economy by raising taxes on the nobles, which of course they block. And when he backs down, he loses credibility. The government spirals, bread prices soar, and every time the word deficit appears in a newspaper, your name follows it like a shadow. Here's a weird detail for your brain to chew on. In these years, someone starts making playing cards with your face on them, except it's not really your face. It's a grotesque caricature. Big hair, big nose, big lies. It's like someone took your official portrait and ran it through a blender of rage and propaganda. They sell out fast. You retreat to Trianon more and more, trying to shut the world out. But even there, the tension seeps in through the lace curtains. You hear the stories, the bakeries being mobbed, the cries of bread in the streets. You ask your ladies in waiting if it's really that bad. They don't answer directly. They pour more tea, and in the distance the rumble of revolution begins. It's early morning, and the light seeping into Versailles has a sharper edge to it, less golden, more ghostly. You feel it before you see it, a shift in the air, like the garden statues are holding their breath. You stretch your aching spine, pinched from yet another night in a bed designed more for display than for sleep, and you listen. The palace is never silent, but lately it's been louder in the wrong ways. Whispers, footsteps running a little too fast, conversations that stop the second you walk by. The walls have ears, and worse, they now seem to have opinions. France is coming apart at the seams. The economy is in freefall. The harvest has failed, again, and the people, once merely hungry, are now angry. You hear stories of riots in Paris over the price of bread, bakeries looted, mobs forming in city squares. But inside the palace gates, everything is still covered in satin and politeness. The contrast is dizzying. You sip your chocolate from porcelain cups while the capital simmers. You wear muslin dresses trimmed with delicate silk while women in the streets wrap rags around their feet. You don't mean to be blind to it, but blindness in this world is part of the role. You start noticing changes at court. People are edgier, former allies pull back. Even your fashion is different now, less extravagant, more restrained. Not out of shame, but caution. You're starting to realise that what you wear, what you say, even how loudly you laugh, it all matters more now. There's a new tension in every drawing room. The laughter doesn't linger like it used to. The walls feel closer. Your Petty Trianon retreats become less carefree and more like exile. You're not escaping to your garden, you're hiding. Still, you try to maintain some control. You host balls trying to boost morale. You throw yourself into family life, focusing on your children, now 2 sons and a daughter. Louis Joseph, your eldest boy, is delicate but bright-eyed. He's the heir, the crown jewel, the small, sickly hope of the Bourbon line. Then there's Louis Charles, younger, sturdier, with curls like spun sugar. You cling to them like anchors while the sea beneath you roils. Then comes 1787, and with it, your growing influence, or at least the rumour of it. The king struggles with policy and finance. Ministers come and go like powdered chess pieces. And behind the scenes, people whisper that you are the one pulling strings, that Marie Antoinette has a hand in everything from tax policy to international diplomacy. It's not really true. You weigh in, sure. You write letters. You offer your opinion, especially when it involves Austria. But the image being built around you now isn't of a queen or even a meddler. It's of a puppet master. L'Autrichienne, they call you now, the Austrian woman. But the pun's even nastier than it sounds. Chienne means bitch in French. You've gone from being a figure of fascination to an object of scorn, and the descent feels both surreal and unstoppable. You read one of the pamphlets. You shouldn't, but you do. And there you are, drawn with fangs and claws, surrounded by money bags and corpses. You want to scream, you want to fight back. But that's the trap, isn't it? If you react, they say you're guilty. If you ignore it, they say you're cold. Historically, the slander machine during this period is wild. Some of the printed accusations are so absurd you almost have to laugh. You're accused of sleeping with guards, with ministers, with your own children. One particularly infamous libelle describes an orgy inside Versailles involving you, several bishops, and a goat in a powdered wig. Okay, the goat part might be creative license, but honestly, nothing was too low. The revolution was being rehearsed in satire long before it hit the streets, and yet amid all this chaos you cling to your routines. You attend court dinners, you host family concerts, you try to soothe your anxious husband, who's now more overwhelmed than ever. Louis isn't a bad man, he's just slow. careful when boldness is needed, gentle when firmness would save him. You coach him as best you can, gently nudging him towards stronger decisions, better alliances. But every step forward is met with backlash. Every royal action, however mild, is now interpreted as a declaration of war on the people. You begin to hear the word reform in a new way, not whispered anymore, but shouted in pamphlets, in speeches, in parliament. People are calling for a constitutional monarchy. Some even say republic, though that still feels like fantasy to most. Louis tries to play peacemaker. He agrees to convene the Estates General in 1789, a meeting of representatives from all three classes, clergy, nobility, and commoners. It hasn't happened in over 170 years. That should give you an idea of how desperate things have become. When the Estates General finally convenes in May, it quickly turns into a volcano. The Third Estate, the commoners, refuse to play by the old rules. They break off, declaring themselves the National Assembly. And just like that, the revolution has a name. Not just hunger, not just anger, but structure, organisation, power. You watch this unfold from behind velvet curtains, but the sound reaches you anyway. It's louder than Versailles. It's louder than your palace orchestra. It's the people, and they've stopped asking. They're starting to demand. In July, it happens. The storming of the Bastille. You're not there, but the image spreads faster than wildfire. A medieval fortress toppled by a furious crowd, heads on pikes, a symbol of royal tyranny torn down by ordinary hands. You see the king's face when the news reaches him. He goes pale. Then he looks to you, as if expecting you to tell him what comes next. And you don't know, because nothing in your life, nothing in your palace, your powdered pages of etiquette, your perfectly curled locks prepared you for this. And while you sit in your salon, your children napping down the hall, you can feel it. Versailles is no longer the centre of France. The centre has shifted. It's out there, in the streets of Paris, in the chants, in the broken windows, in the idea that kings can fall, that queens can bleed. The perfume of Versailles still clings to everything, but now it smells more like decay than decadence. You walk the marble corridors with your chin lifted, powdered and perfumed, but you know what people are saying. You hear it in the way the servants whisper when they think you're out of earshot. You see it in the eyes of the guards who don't salute as crisply anymore. The walls may still be gilded, but they're closing in. It's October 1789. A wet, grey Paris morning has birthed something that no royal decree can hold back. The March of the Women. Thousands of women, mostly fishmongers and market workers from Les Halles, are storming through the streets with pikes, knives and empty baskets, crying for bread. But it's not just about food anymore. It's about justice. And more specifically, it's about you. You're their symbol now, the embodiment of everything that's wrong with the monarchy. You, the foreign queen with your silks and your farm-themed palace and your endless scandal-soaked rumours. You, the Austrian bitch, the villain of every tabloid and tavern tale. Whether you deserve it or not has long since stopped mattering. They begin marching toward Versailles. The guards scramble. You can hear it from your chambers, the sudden rush of boots on marble, the sound of orders being shouted through gritted teeth. For a moment, you think it might be another false alarm. Then comes the shouting, the distant roar, louder, closer. You gather your children. Your daughter clutches your skirts, confused. Your younger son looks up at you with wide eyes, sucking on his thumb. You can't show fear. You kneel down, kiss their heads, whisper that everything will be fine. You don't believe it, but they need to. Outside, chaos unfolds. The women from Paris break into the palace. Some are barefoot, some are soaked to the bone. Many are carrying blades. They storm through the gates, tear through the royal apartments, searching. One of your bodyguards is decapitated. Another is mutilated and thrown into the fountains. The Queen's bedchamber, your bedchamber, is ransacked. They were minutes from catching you. Only a secret corridor known to a few trusted staff saved your life. By dawn, the king is forced to stand on the balcony and address the crowd. They demand he move to Paris. Not just him. You too. The people want the royal family in the capital. No more hiding behind palace walls. They want to watch you, smell your food, hear your lies in person. And so begins the death march of your old life. You leave Versailles in a heavy carriage, escorted by the very mob that overran your home. You try not to look out the window, but when you do, you see it. A severed head on a pike. One of your guards. The pike is held high by a woman wearing a soaked apron and no shoes. She's grinning. You don't scream, you don't cry. You sit straighter, fix your eyes on the horizon, and breathe like your corset isn't slicing into your ribs. Because if you break now, you know they'll never let you put yourself back together again. The procession is slow and surreal, from Versailles to Paris, through miles of mud and jeers, with the heads of your defenders paraded like banners ahead of you. The people chant, sing, heckle. You hold your son tighter. He asks why the people are shouting. You tell him they're celebrating your arrival. It's the closest thing to mercy you can offer. When you reach the Tuileries Palace, it's clear this is no royal residence. It's cold, dim, and neglected. The walls are cracked. The tapestries are faded. The smell of mould and dust hangs in the air like bad omens. But this is your new home, your new cage. The guards assigned to you are less loyal, less polished, more suspicious. They listen through doors. They watch you eat. Every move is logged, every glance noted. You're not under house arrest, yet. But the distinction is mostly academic. In public, you pretend things are normal. You hold court, give stiff smiles, wear your mourning silks for appearances. In private, you write frantic letters to your family in Austria, begging for help, for advice, for anything. You're trapped in a city that wants you dead, surrounded by people who think your downfall is poetic justice. And yet, you still fight. This is where the idea of you starts to fracture into layers. To some, you become a tragic heroine, graceful under pressure, protective of your children, loyal to your faltering husband. To others, you're still the villain, haughty, manipulative, clinging to luxury while France burns. One side sees your calm as courage, the other sees it as contempt. And then there's Count Axel von Fersen. The Swedish nobleman, handsome and well-placed in European diplomacy, has been a close companion for years. He's rumoured to be your lover. Historians still debate it. Some claim your relationship was purely platonic. Others insist he was the great love of your life. His letters to you are intimate, tender and coded. Yours to him are cautious, emotional, and equally veiled. Whether you were lovers or just two people clinging to each other in a collapsing world, one thing is clear. He risked everything to help you. With Fersen's help, secret escape plans begin. Routes are plotted, costumes prepared, messages sent in invisible ink. You believe, just for a moment, that you might outrun this. That maybe, you can make it to Austria, or Belgium, or anywhere with clean air and no guillotines. But tonight, as you tuck your children into their narrow beds in this cold palace that still smells like mildew and menace, you know one thing for certain: Versailles is gone. Not just as a building, but as a way of life. You left behind your silk gowns and satin slippers, but you also left behind the illusion that royalty makes you untouchable. Now you're within reach, and the people are reaching. It starts like a whispered fairy tale, this plan to vanish. One evening, after the children are asleep and the candles burn low in the Tuileries, you lean over your writing desk with trembling hands and sketch out the first lines of your escape. The ink smudges slightly, part nerves, part the clammy Parisian air seeping into everything. You're writing not as a queen, but as a desperate mother. You want your family out. You want your children to grow up where the sky isn't dark with smoke and hatred. And more than anything, you want your life back. The one with music and meadows and soft gowns instead of cold stairs and creaking prison floors. It's now 1791. You've been in this gilded cell for nearly 2 years, and each day feels more like a countdown. Louis, bless him, agrees to the plan, though you have to prod him a bit. He's never been one for bold decisions. But you, Marie Antoinette, you're ready. You were raised to rule. And if you can't rule, then at least you'll run. The details of the plan are meticulous because they have to be. The route is mapped from Paris to Montmédy, a fortress town near the Austrian border. You'll travel in disguise, dressed not as the Queen of France, but as a governess. Your children will play the roles of commoners. The king, a valet. The irony is rich. Your husband pretending to serve others for once. You choose a large, covered coach. Comfortable, yes, but that comfort is your first mistake. It's too conspicuous. The wheels creak like a funeral cart and the horses are sluggish under the June heat. It's like trying to sneak through a crowd dressed in fireworks. Still, the journey begins with hope. You slip away in the middle of the night, cloaked in shadows and tension. The city behind you breathes a little easier without knowing why. You lean out of the carriage window just once to catch a last glimpse of Paris. It's still glowing with the faint haze of gaslight. You wonder if you'll ever see it again. Inside the coach, the mood is tense but optimistic. Louis is silent. The children are sleepy, unaware they're part of a high-stakes chess game. You cling to the fantasy that by nightfall tomorrow you'll be safe and free. You'll live near the border, protected by loyal troops. You'll raise your children in peace. Maybe, just maybe, you'll even be forgiven someday. But France has other ideas. The journey, at first, goes smoothly. You pass through towns without incident, though you draw the occasional curious glance. It's your face. Too well known. It's been stamped onto coins, painted in salons and skewered in 1,000 pamphlets. And yet, you press on. Hour by hour the distance grows. You're within reach of the border. Then, in the town of Varennes, so close to safety the border practically hums, you're recognised. A postmaster, alert and suspicious, compares your face to one on a printed assignat, the paper currency bearing your husband's royal profile. He squints. He sees it. You see him seeing it. You're caught. The town erupts in confusion. The National Guard is summoned. Your coach is surrounded. The people want answers and your answers sound hollow. The crowd swells, shouting, laughing, threatening. Louis tries to explain. You sit beside him, unmoving, silent, composed in a way that makes some people hate you even more. You're taken back, escorted, really. But let's not sugarcoat it. It's a forced march, a return under guard, through angry towns and villages where the cheers have turned to jeers. In one town, a woman spits at you. In another, someone throws manure at the carriage. You wipe it off your son's sleeve quietly without a word. When you arrive in Paris, the silence is louder than any crowd. No cheers, no trumpets, no procession, just rows of faces, some blank, some enraged, some quietly triumphant. You're no longer seen as a monarch who made a mistake. You're a traitor now, a foreign spy, a woman who tried to abandon her country in its hour of need. The assembly strips you and Louis of what little power remained. You're placed under tighter guard. The people whisper treason, like it's already a verdict. And worse still, the children feel it. Your daughter asks why the guards no longer smile. Your son flinches at loud noises. Historians still debate whose fault it was. Some say it was yours. You pushed the escape too soon, too extravagantly, too naively. Others blame Louis, who stalled and hesitated at every step. Some even argue Fersen made errors in timing or logistics. But really it doesn't matter. The outcome speaks for itself. The royal family is now prisoners in all but name, and the public trust is shattered. And then comes the fallout. The press goes wild. You're mocked not just as a queen, but as a failed actress. One satirical cartoon shows you with a donkey's ears, peeking out from the coach like a foolish runaway. Another shows your carriage flying through the air only to be shot down by cannonballs labelled Liberté and Revolution. And the worst part, you can't even respond. You can't defend yourself. Your voice has been taken. All you can do is smile politely when required, nod at the right moments, and watch as your image, once opulent and envied, turns into a cautionary tale. You spend the next days in near-total seclusion. The Tuileries feels more like a prison than ever before. The windows are shuttered. Guards patrol the halls. Letters are censored. Visitors are denied. You are alone, except for your children and Louis, who is rapidly slipping into a kind of quiet despair. He was never built for this. Neither of you were. But now, there's no hiding behind crowns or carriages. There's just you, the people, and a razor-thin line between survival and spectacle. The fairy tale is over. The curtain has dropped. And the Queen, you, are now the villain in someone else's story. The air inside the Tuileries is stiff with unspoken panic, the kind that doesn't rush in like a storm but settles, heavy and slow into the bones of everyone inside. You feel it most in the mornings, when the light creeps through the shutters and catches on the dust hanging above the parquet floor. It's a strange kind of quiet, the kind that follows failure. The failed escape has changed everything. Before, you were watched. Now, you're outright hated. Before, you were mocked. Now, you're feared. And fear, your learning, turns quickly to vengeance. The royal family is under house arrest in all but name, though the guards are now bold enough to drop the pretense. You hear them laughing outside your rooms. You notice how they stop standing when you enter, how they take longer to respond to requests. One evening, you catch a guard going through your drawers, pretending not to notice the letter you'd tucked beneath your dressing table. Yet another unsent plea to your brother in Austria. You say nothing. What could you say? Still, you try to maintain a routine. Your children are everything now. Your youngest, Louis Charles, clings to you like ivy. You hold him too tightly sometimes, as if your grip might slow history down. Marie-Thérèse, your daughter, is only 11 but already understands too much. She's quiet, observant. You catch her staring at the ceiling some nights, long after bedtime, as if trying to imagine what it was like to be free. Louis has retreated further into himself. He spends his days reading, fiddling with locks and waiting, always waiting. You try to pull him into conversation, to reignite the spark of kingship you once hoped lived deep inside him. But it's no use. He's resigned. You're not. You still believe you can turn this around. You have to. What else is left? Your belief in strategy keeps you moving. In letters smuggled out by loyal servants, you plead with Austria, with Sweden, with anyone who might still see you as more than a failed monarch. Your brother, Emperor Leopold II, responds with vague promises and diplomat speak. You want armies, you get condolences, you want rescue, you get distance. And then comes 1792, the year everything tilts past the point of no return. Rumours reach you in scattered pieces. Austria's mobilising, Prussia too. There's talk of invading France to restore order, to restore you. At first, it seems like hope. Then you realise the people think you are behind it. They think you're orchestrating this from your dressing room, that you're feeding secrets to the enemy. Every loss on the battlefield becomes your fault. Every French soldier who dies, your guilt. Here's where things get properly surreal. You, Marie Antoinette, are now a war criminal without leaving your chair, a foreign agent without holding a map. They call you the Austrian she-wolf. They print images of you feasting on the corpses of French children. One pamphlet claims you're sending coded letters inside pastries. Another says you seduced the Austrian ambassador using black magic and sex. Somehow they believe both. What they don't know, what you can't let them know, is that some of it isn't entirely wrong. You're communicating with foreign powers, not for conquest but for escape. And yes, Fersen is involved. He's still out there, still loyal, still dangerous in the way only a man with a sense of honour and a flair for secret doors can be. But it's all too late. In August, Paris erupts. This time, not just women with hunger. This time, it's a city drenched in fury. Revolutionary guards storm the Tuileries. The palace is defended poorly by the Swiss Guard. Loyal men, but hopelessly outnumbered. The fighting is brutal. Blood pools in the stairwells. You hear it happening from inside. The gunshots, the screams, the unmistakable chaos of something sacred being torn apart. You and your family are ushered through hidden passages and eventually taken to the Legislative Assembly under protective custody, which is the polite phrase they use before locking you in a tower. No more palace, no more ceremony, no more pretending. You are now prisoners. They send you to the temple, a medieval fortress turned revolutionary holding cell. Its thick walls and iron doors were never meant to house children. Louis Charles doesn't understand. He asks when he'll go home. You tell him soon, knowing full well there is no home to go back to. Your daughter helps you unpack, folding clothes into drawers that smell like damp stone and old wood. It's astonishing how quickly you all adapt to this new rhythm. Wake up, endure the day, sleep, repeat. But you never stop writing. You keep notes, journals, letters to allies and family members who may or may not still be listening. It's your only form of resistance now, words on paper. Your pen is the last sceptre you hold. You try to maintain dignity, to stay regal, even when your gowns have gone threadbare and your powder is long gone. You greet guards with polite nods. You correct your children's posture. You read aloud in the evenings, pretending it's still a salon, not a cell, but your heart is starting to crack. Here's a strange footnote. During this time, your jailers develop a sort of twisted admiration for you. Some report how composed you are, how kind to your children, how graceful under humiliation. It doesn't save you, but it earns you something curious: regret. Later, after it's all over, some of these men will say they didn't know what they were part of, that they thought it was justice, that they hadn't expected to feel guilty. The debate still rages. Was your imprisonment inevitable? Could you have avoided this if the flight to Varennes had worked? If Louis had reformed earlier? If you had been more discreet, less extravagant, more politically aware? Maybe. Maybe not. History rarely gives clean answers. But the one thing that's clear, crystal clear, is that the revolution is no longer about ideas. It's about blood, and yours is next. The days in the temple stretch like overcooked taffy, sticky, slow, and slightly unreal. Time is no longer measured in ceremonies or seasons, but in guard shifts and bread deliveries. You wake to the scrape of keys in the lock, the sound of boots on stone, the murmur of guards outside the door. Sometimes they talk about you like you're not listening. Sometimes they talk to you, asking questions not out of curiosity, but to poke at your pride. You've stopped answering. Silence, you've learned, is your only weapon now. Louis is no longer king. That title was officially stripped after the monarchy was abolished in September 1792. They now refer to him as Citizen Louis Capet. The name drips with contempt. Capet, the old dusty surname of his distant ancestors, chosen purposefully to reduce him to a nobody. A man, not a monarch, just another face in the crowd. But you don't say it out loud. To you, he's still le roi. Broken, unsure, pitiful in some ways, yes, but still your husband, still your children's father, still the symbol of a life that has slipped between your fingers like dry sand. And now, the revolution wants his head. You know it's coming. You see it in the way the guards look at you. You hear it in the chants from the streets. Death to the tyrant. No more kings! The National Convention debates it endlessly, but the verdict feels predetermined. The trial, if you can call it that, begins in December. Louis is accused of everything from colluding with foreign enemies to betraying the revolution to orchestrating massacres. Some of the charges are based on intercepted letters, yours included. Others are pure invention. The prosecution doesn't care about facts. They want a symbol to destroy. He's given a chance to defend himself. His lawyers do their best, but the room is filled with a rage that no argument can reach. On January 23rd, 1793, he is sentenced to death by a narrow vote. Even now you cling to hope. You think maybe someone will intervene, maybe public sympathy will rise, maybe France, at the last moment, will remember he was once their king. They don't. The morning of his execution, you are not allowed to see him. Instead, a note, brief, heart-wrenching, is passed to your quarters. He tells you to stay strong, to care for the children, to forgive those who have wronged you. You read it silently, again and again, until the words blur and the page is damp. He is led to the guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. The crowd is enormous. Some say 30,000 people. Some cheer, others cry. He walks with surprising calm, says a few words about his innocence, and then he is silenced. The blade falls. The people scream like they've just won a war. You find out hours later when one of your guards lets it slip. No ceremony, no dignity, just a shrug and a cruel comment. That's how you learn your husband is dead. You don't faint, you don't scream. You go into the corner of the room, sit on the floor and wrap your arms around your children. They ask why Papa isn't coming back. You lie, because what else can you do? You tell them he's gone to heaven. You tell them it was quick. You don't tell them about the blood-soaked handkerchiefs, the man who tried to dip his sleeve in Louis's blood as a souvenir. Some things children shouldn't carry. The days that follow blur into mourning. But it's mourning without the rituals. No black gowns, no funeral, no masses. Just an endless, aching silence that settles like frost. You lose weight. You barely sleep. You try to stay composed for the children, but the guards notice the change. They begin treating you even more like a ghost, and then the revolution turns its eye toward you. It begins quietly. You're separated from your children under the excuse of re-education. Louis Charles is taken from your arms by guards who won't meet your eyes. You beg, you bargain, you fall to your knees. It doesn't matter. He's gone. You're told he'll be placed with a tutor loyal to the Republic. In reality, he is locked in a dark room, starved, beaten and manipulated until he no longer recognizes your name. They're trying to make him forget you. Marie-Thérèse, your daughter, is allowed to stay, for now. You cling to her like a lifeline. She becomes your confidant, your comfort, but she is still a child, and you are unravelling. Your own trial is announced in the summer of 1793. They say it will be swift. They're not lying. You're transferred to the Conciergerie, a dark, damp prison on the Ile de la Cité. If the temple felt like exile, this is purgatory. The walls drip, the floors are slick. The women around you are hardened, some mad, some just pretending to be. They recognise you immediately. Some nod in silent sympathy. Others spit at your feet. You sleep on a straw mattress. The smell of mildew thick in the air. No more silks, no perfumes, just grey wool and the sound of rats in the night. The trial begins in October. The charges are absurd and grotesque. Treason, collusion with Austria, depletion of the national treasury, incest with your son. That last one strikes something inside you so deeply that for a moment you can't speak. You want to scream, to rip the courtroom apart, but you don't. You simply say, "I appeal to all mothers." Those words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Even some of your enemies pause, but again, it doesn't matter. The verdict is decided before you enter the room. You are guilty, sentenced to death. The Queen of France will die by guillotine. Back in your cell, you spend your final night writing a letter to your sister-in-law, Madame Elisabeth. You call her your sister, your friend. You write with astonishing grace and calm. You ask her to care for your children. You forgive your enemies. You say goodbye to your family, to your old life, to the world. You fold the letter. The ink is still wet when the guards come to collect you. The morning of your execution, the sky over Paris is a bleak, indifferent grey. The kind that doesn't weep, doesn't shine, just hangs. You rise early, if you slept at all, your breath visible in the cold air of your damp cell. Your final night was not soft. No last rites, no comfort, no candlelit goodbyes. The guards brought you a rough chemise and a pair of coarse shoes. Your hands shook as you folded your last letter. You'd asked for black, for mourning, but they gave you white instead, the colour of purity, or depending on who you ask, the colour of a shroud. You dress yourself in silence. No ladies in waiting, no attendants to fasten your bodice or powder your hair. You chop it off yourself in front of a mirror that barely reflects. The scissors are dull, and your hair falls in uneven clumps to the floor. Once, your locks had been sculpted into ships and castles. Now, they're just something to keep out of the way of the blade. The executioner arrives with a cart, not a carriage. It's open, creaking, and smells like old blood and rotten straw. You climb in without help. You refuse the blindfold. You want to see everything. Your spine is straight, your hands bound, your mouth closed. Even now they try to strip you of dignity. But you give them nothing. The ride to the scaffold is slow. The crowds are immense. Thousands of people crammed along the Rue Saint-Honoré, eager to see the final fall of a queen. They jeer. Some throw things. Rotten vegetables, scraps of meat, a handful of rocks. You flinch once, but quickly regain composure. You scan the crowd, searching for any familiar face. There are none, just mouths open in joy or fury. The occasional tear, maybe, but not enough to change anything. The cart jostles over cobblestones. You pass shops where you once shopped, salons where you once danced, churches where you once prayed. You pass the Tuileries, now stripped of its glamour, its gates smeared with political slogans. You wonder if the curtains are still drawn in your old bedroom. You wonder if anyone even remembers the woman who once lived there. At one point the wheel sticks in a rut. The cart lurches. You stumble forward, nearly fall, and step clumsily on the executioner's foot. "Pardon me," you say softly. It's your last recorded words. No drama, no defiance, just etiquette. It would be funny if it weren't so cruel. You reach the Place de la Révolution, once a noble square, now soaked with the memory of recent deaths. The guillotine looms, red-stained and gleaming. It creaks slightly in the wind like a stage prop. And in a way, it is. This is theatre, a spectacle. You're no longer a person to these people. You are a lesson. They march you up the steps. You don't resist. You don't beg. You look out at the crowd one last time. You see children sitting on shoulders. You see a baker wiping flour from his hands. You see women who once dressed like you watching in silence. You wonder if any of them still wear your perfume. The executioner gestures. You kneel, your hands tremble, but your voice does not crack. You say nothing more. The blade falls, and the crowd roars. Your head is held aloft by the executioner, shown to the masses as proof that the revolution has no room for queens. Blood drips onto the wooden planks, joins the puddles of those who died before you. Some cheer, others whisper, a few maybe turn away. It's over. You're 37, and yet this is where the myth truly begins. In the days that follow, your death is both celebrated and mourned. Revolutionary leaders call it justice. Monarchs across Europe call it murder. The royal courts of Austria and Spain go into formal mourning. Priests in secret whisper prayers for your soul. In drawing rooms and alleys and churches, your name is spoken with either venom or reverence, rarely indifference. Your body is tossed into a communal grave at the Madeleine Cemetery. No marker, no epitaph, just soil and time. But even the dirt can't hold you forever. Years later, long after the revolution burns itself out and Napoleon struts onto the stage, your story resurfaces. People begin to wonder, was she really that terrible? Was she just a victim of circumstance? A misunderstood scapegoat in a collapsing world? The legend of Marie Antoinette begins its slow, glamorous resurrection. And that brings us to the most enduring myth, the infamous phrase, "let them eat cake." You didn't say it. There's no record, no letter, no diary entry, no witness that attributes those words to you. The first version of the phrase appears decades earlier, in reference to another royal. But facts, as you've learned too well, are no match for a good line. The image of you, sipping champagne powdered to perfection, laughing as peasants beg for bread, is too poetic to die. So it lives on. It becomes your legacy, whether you said it or not. Historians argue over the origins of the myth. Some blame revolutionary propaganda. Others say it was simply a misunderstanding, blown into legend by time and rage. Still others suggest it was deliberate, an easy, catchy way to condense class fury into a single sentence. But none of that changes the reality. It became your sentence, not from a judge, but from history. The tragedy of it? You did care, at least more than they believed. You gave to charity. You adopted poor children. You wept for the sick and the dying. But none of that mattered once your name was tied to indifference. Once the image took root, it grew, wild and cruel, until it strangled whatever nuance once lived beneath your crown. So now, decades after your head was severed, schoolchildren still recite that line. Cartoon queens still toss cakes from balconies. Memes, movies, musicals, all echo that phrase. You're less a woman now than an icon, a punchline, a warning, and yet, sometimes, in a quiet moment, someone reads your final letter, or visits the site of the guillotine, or sees your portrait in a museum and wonders what you were really like. And in those moments, the legend flickers. The ghost becomes a girl again. Not a queen, not a monster, just Marie. The silence after your death is both immediate and eternal. The crowd disperses like smoke in the wind, their chants and cheers fading beneath the clatter of carts and the bustle of Paris returning to its new revolutionary normal. But your absence lingers. It seeps into the city's bones like damp into stone, heavy and quiet. You're gone, but the idea of you refuses to die. If anything, your execution only feeds it. Inside the temple, your daughter Marie-Thérèse hears the news not from a family member or a priest, but from a guard who mutters it with casual cruelty. Your mother, he says, has followed your father. That's it. No explanation, no ceremony. Just a door closing a little too loudly, and the sudden, breathless understanding that she is now truly alone. Your son, Louis Charles, just 8 years old, has already been torn from her side, and what happens to him next is one of the darkest, most harrowing parts of your legacy. The revolutionary authorities have decided to re-educate the boy, to make him a symbol of the people's triumph. They put him in the hands of a cobbler named Antoine Simon, a man chosen less for his pedagogical expertise and more for his revolutionary zeal. The idea is simple. Turn the boy into a good little Republican. Strip him of his royal mannerisms, his faith, his family. Mould him like clay. Break him. They succeed, horrifically. Locked away in a filthy cell, the Dauphin is subjected to neglect, starvation and abuse. He's forced to drink, taught to swear, encouraged to forget his name. They pressure him into signing a statement accusing you, his mother, of incest. He does, though the signature is barely legible, his hand trembling, his mind already fraying. It's not betrayal, it's survival, and it's not even really about him. It's about you, about dismantling you entirely, piece by piece. They couldn't just kill your body, they needed to kill your memory. And what better way than to turn your own son against you? Let the public read the statement. Let them nod. Let them say, "See, even her child condemns her." But behind the revolutionary bravado, something more unsettling is unfolding, because the people are starting to feel it. An unease, a guilt. The adrenaline rush of revolution has begun to taper off, leaving only bloodied streets and hollow victories. The monarchy is gone, yes. The guillotine stands proud and busy. But the Republic isn't the utopia they promised. The food is still scarce. The wars rage on. The executions are increasing, not decreasing. The reign of terror is in full bloom. Robespierre, the face of virtue turned fanatic, is now ordering heads to roll daily. Enemies of the revolution? Define that however you like. Noble, priest, former servant, suspected sympathizer. It doesn't matter. The blade doesn't discriminate. Even revolutionary heroes are dragged up the steps to the guillotine as the revolution begins to eat its own. And yet, your ghost hovers over all of it. In the newspapers, your name is still invoked to justify cruelty. In speeches, you're blamed for crimes both real and imagined. You're the emblem of decadence, of arrogance, of everything the revolution believes it must destroy. But outside the feverish speeches and pamphlets, something stranger is beginning to happen. People start whispering about you differently, not as the she-wolf, but as the tragic queen, the wronged mother, the woman who stood tall on the scaffold and met death with grace. There's one moment in particular that seems to plant the seed of sympathy. That final letter you wrote to Madame Elizabeth. It never reached her. She would die herself at the guillotine months later. But the letter survives, and when it's eventually published, people are shocked. It isn't a rant. It isn't bitter. It's calm, heartfelt, almost unnervingly human. "I pardon all my enemies," you wrote. "I die in the Catholic, Apostolic and Roman religion. I say nothing to you of my feelings for you, my dear sister. How could I express them?" For a while, the people believed you were made of stone, cold, unfeeling, a marble tyrant in satin. But here, in ink, you're simply Marie, a woman who knew her children were being torn from her, who knew she was going to die, and still found a way to write with clarity, compassion and dignity. It rattles people. Quietly, of course. No one wants to be seen sympathising with a queen. But the perception starts to crack, and then, in 1795, Louis Charles, your little boy, dies in prison. They say it was tuberculosis. Others whisper he was beaten to death. His body is emaciated, covered in sores. He'd been locked alone for months without sunlight or human kindness. His jailers barely noticed when he stopped speaking, stopped eating, stopped existing. He was 10. You'd always feared you wouldn't live to see your children grow up. But what happened was worse. They didn't get to grow up at all. Marie-Thérèse miraculously survives. She remains imprisoned for over 3 years, kept in isolation, watched constantly. She doesn't know the fate of her family. When she's finally released in late 1795, part of a prisoner exchange arranged by Austria, she's 18 and has lost everyone. But she remembers you, and she doesn't let the world forget. She travels through Europe, eventually settling in Austria and then in England. Her name opens doors, but it's her resolve that makes people listen. She collects your letters, your portraits. She tells your story. She corrects the lies. She demands that people remember you not as a caricature but as a mother, a sister, a woman who was flawed but never monstrous. Through her you begin to take shape again. Not just the queen with high hair and higher expenses, but a person. You start appearing in books, in salons, in whispered debates about justice and mercy. Artists paint you in soft light. Writers imagine your inner life. Historians start to question whether the legend matches the woman. Of course, the debates never stop. Some say you were naive, others say you were brave. Some blame you for the revolution entirely. Others argue you were merely swept along by a tide too powerful to stop. A few insist you deserved everything. A few think you were a saint. But here's the strange truth. The real Marie Antoinette, the girl from Vienna, the awkward Dauphine, the fashion icon, the embattled mother, the queen who fell, is probably somewhere in between. And perhaps that's the most human legacy of all. It's strange, isn't it? How death can sharpen a person's image more than life ever could. You, once mocked for being out of touch, for the towering hair and the silk-draped excess, are now a symbol again. But this time, not just of monarchy, but of loss, of fragility, of myth. The revolution killed you, yes, but it didn't kill the world's obsession with you. In fact, it only fueled it. There's a peculiar irony in that. They wanted to erase you, but they ended up preserving you forever. While the blood of the revolution still dries on Paris's cobblestones, Europe is already reworking your story. In Austria, your surviving family mourns you in a very public way. Grand portraits commissioned, black veils drawn, court mourning periods declared. You're rebranded as a martyr, a daughter of the Habsburg Empire who was sacrificed by France. The Empress Maria Theresa would have been smug if she'd lived to see it. "I told you they'd hate her," she might have said. "She should have married into Naples." In England, you're a cautionary tale, proof that revolutions get messy, that mob rule is just a powder keg waiting for a stray spark. Pamphlets circulate painting you as a doomed romantic figure, someone who loved roses and music and fell prey to a world too cruel for her delicate soul. Of course, they conveniently gloss over the fact that British cartoonists once skewered you just as gleefully as the French. Revisionist history loves a makeover, and back in France, well, France tries to forget, for a while. After the terror collapses under the weight of its own guillotine and Robespierre loses his head like everyone else, the national mood shifts, exhaustion sets in, regret too. People begin to speak your name again, quietly, in salons and behind fans. Did we go too far, they wonder? She was composed on the scaffold, someone adds. She didn't scream, you know. As if that changes anything. As if dying gracefully earns you absolution. Eventually, under Napoleon, your story is wrapped into something more palatable. The monarchy is gone, but the spectacle of it, that never really dies. Napoleon, who once mocked kings, wraps himself in imperial robes and crowns himself emperor. And part of that new imperial mythology involves defining himself against you. He's strong where Louis was weak, decisive where you were indulgent. He represents a new France. But even as he builds his empire, the ghosts of the old court linger. Versailles is no longer a home but a monument, and you, Marie Antoinette, become part of that haunted architecture. Here's a fringe little fact. For decades after your death, people claim to see your ghost, not metaphorically, literally. There are stories of a pale woman in a white chemise wandering the halls of the Tuileries humming a lullaby. A tourist swears she saw you in the gardens at Versailles, standing near the Petty Trianon, gazing toward the horizon as if still waiting for a carriage that never came. One account from 1901 by two English women becomes infamous. They insist they stepped into a time slip and saw you alive painting in the garden, moments before the revolution reached you. It becomes a best-selling book. Historians scoff, paranormal enthusiasts nod with knowing expressions. Either way, the story sticks. But even beyond ghost stories, your legacy drifts into something more surprising. Art. The painters return to you first. You're no longer just a figure of history, you're a canvas. Elisabeth Vigée, Le Brun, your favourite portraitist, had once painted you as soft, serene, beautiful. After your death, those portraits take on new weight. Museums begin collecting them like relics. They show you not in royal garb, but in muslin, as a mother, as a woman. Then the writers come. Novels are written in your voice. Letters are forged and published with teary flourishes. Poets romanticize your downfall. In 1848, the tides of revolution swell again in Europe, but now they come with footnotes about you. Comparisons are drawn. Crowns teeter once more. The public is reminded. Monarchies fall. Queens bleed. And history loops back on itself like a snake. In the late 19th century, there's a brief but passionate resurgence of Marie Antoinette mania. Fashion designers borrow your silhouettes. High waists, puffed sleeves, soft pastels. Costume balls are thrown in your honour. Perfume houses name scents after you. Furniture styles from the Trianon are replicated in chic Parisian apartments. You, the queen who was once too modern for Versailles and too royal for the Revolution, become timeless. And yet, there's always tension. Feminists begin to argue about you. Some claim you were a victim of a patriarchal machine, a woman stripped of agency, blamed for the failures of men, and ridiculed for her attempts at independence. Others say you were out of touch, that you played shepherdess while your people starved, that your performative peasant cosplay at the Hameau was insulting, not endearing. The debate doesn't settle, it evolves. Some even call you an early fashion influencer, a woman who understood the power of image in a world obsessed with appearances. Modern scholars get in on the action too. Biographies spill across bookshelves. Some paint you as a tragic pawn, others as a savvy political actor misread by history. One biography points out that while you're remembered for excess, your total household spending was less than that of earlier queens. Another reveals that you gave huge sums to charities, funded hospitals, and personally intervened in cases of injustice, things that never made it into the revolutionary pamphlets. The debates go on, but something curious happens beneath it all. Empathy grows. People begin to see you as a human being, not a symbol. Not just the queen who fell, but the girl who was forced into a role she never asked for. The teen who was shipped off at 14. The young wife caught between a shy husband and an impossible court. The mother who lost everything. You were complex, flawed, yes, but aren't we all? And here's another strange twist. In 1815, during the Bourbon Restoration, your remains are exhumed from their unmarked grave and reburied with full honours at the Basilica of Saint-Denis. A marble monument is erected. The Queen is back among the kings. Dignity restored. At least symbolically. You never saw it, of course. Never saw your daughter married off in exile. Never saw your name rehabilitated. Never got to defend yourself. But somehow, your legacy outlasted all of it. The revolution, the pamphlets, the blade. You became what no one expected, unforgettable. You'd think that being dead for over 2 centuries would finally allow you to rest, to fade gently into the dusty pages of history beside all the other monarchs whose names are remembered only by exam-cramming students and overly passionate reenactors. But no, Marie Antoinette, you're still very much alive in the cultural imagination, flitting in and out of fashion like a ghost with a spectacular wardrobe. Whether they love you, pity you, blame you, or cosplay as you, people just can't let you go. You've become the historical equivalent of a celebrity who dies young, forever frozen in time, mythologized, picked apart, then resurrected in whatever shape the moment demands. In the 20th century, your image is completely overhauled. Gone is the villainous Austrian she-wolf. Enter the tragic beauty, the misunderstood girl queen. Hollywood catches wind of this transformation and does what Hollywood does best. It turns your life into lush, melodramatic cinema. Norma Shearer plays you in 1938's Marie Antoinette, giving you grace, depth, and some seriously dazzling gowns. It's a sweeping, sympathetic portrayal that makes audiences cry into their popcorn and forget that you were ever accused of bankrupting France. Then, in 2006, Sofia Coppola gives you another cinematic rebirth, this time in pastel. Marie Antoinette, the film, is part costume drama, part punk dreamscape. You, played by Kirsten Dunst, are a bubblegum-coloured vision of loneliness, decadence, and youth, crushed under the weight of politics. The film is divisive. Historians groan at its historical liberties. Critics argue about whether it's brilliant or just bored. But one thing is clear. For a whole new generation, you become relatable. the misunderstood teen, the overwhelmed girl, the trapped woman surrounded by expectations, noise and frosting. And honestly, that's not too far off. Because when you strip away the wigs and court protocols and guillotine, what's left is someone very human. You didn't choose your marriage. You didn't invent Versailles. You didn't draft tax policy. You were born into a game, handed a crown, and told to smile. And even when the world began to burn, you tried to mother your children, manage your image, and keep breathing. That's not villainy. That's survival, or at least the attempt. Of course, not everyone buys the redemption arc. You're still blamed in some circles for France's financial collapse, even though the country was already in massive debt when you arrived. Some modern historians continue to call you frivolous, manipulative, or tone-deaf. They highlight the amour, the gambling, the fashion bills, and ask, how could she not see the storm coming? Others answer that you did see it, just too late. And then there's the scholarship that examines how you were scapegoated because of your gender. You were expected to produce heirs, charm the court, save the monarchy's reputation, and never show too much influence. When you failed to do any of that perfectly, and let's face it, who could, you became the easy target. A foreign woman, married into France, surrounded by enemies and under a microscope from the age of 14. Your story, to many, becomes an early case study in misogynistic politics. How a powerful woman is either adored or destroyed depending on the day. Even your clothes aren't safe from scrutiny. Fashion historians spend years dissecting your wardrobe like archaeologists with silks. They marvel at your choices, your rejection of the heavy court dresses, your embrace of simple muslins, your shift toward natural hair and lighter styles. Some say it was rebellion, others say it was just comfort. Either way, you helped redefine fashion, not because you were trying to start a revolution, but because you wanted to breathe in a dress that didn't weigh 20 pounds. That's the part of your legacy that's oddly revolutionary. You were trying, in your own way, to live honestly inside a system built entirely on performance. You wore lighter fabrics. You escaped to Trianon. You played with your children. You stepped out of the rigid formality of the role, if only in brief moments. It didn't save you, but it's part of why people still talk about you. You became real, or at least more real than the idea of a queen was supposed to be. And let's not pretend we don't love a fallen royal. Modern culture practically feasts on it. Princess Diana, Meghan Markle. Even fictional queens, from Game of Thrones to Bridgerton, owe something to your story. The trapped woman in the palace. The one who wants to be more than a crown and a smile. You walked that path first, and left a trail of powdered sugar footprints behind you. Meanwhile, the relics of your life become collector's items. A pair of your silk shoes sells for hundreds of thousands of euros. A lock of your hair is displayed under glass. Even your bed linens are hotly debated at auctions. People build entire museum exhibits around you. Scholars travel to Versailles just to stand where you stood, touch the doorknobs you turned. There's even a niche online subculture that replicates your recipes. Yes, people make 18th century hot chocolate because it was your favourite. And then, of course, there's the memification of your persona. In a world where historical figures are turned into internet content, you are meme gold. The let them eat cake quote, still falsely attributed, pops up everywhere, from birthday cards to Twitter takedowns. You're photoshopped onto cupcakes, GIFs, and feminist Instagram posts. You're turned into a mood, an aesthetic, a Tumblr blog with a pale pink background, soft focus, candlelight, a cryptic caption that says mood, executed, but make it fashion. Oddly enough, it works, because there's something about you, Marie, that refuses to stay in the past. You live on in contradictions, your elegance and tragedy, indulgence and injustice, a victim and a participant, misunderstood and unforgettable. The fact that your story is still debated, dramatized, adapted, and adored is the clearest sign of all that your ghost is still here. Powdered, proud, and occasionally sarcastic. Maybe that's the final irony. You didn't get to write your ending, but you've had more posthumous editors than anyone could ask for. And centuries later, the story is still unfinished. Because Marie Antoinette, the woman, the myth, the meme, you're still becoming. It's almost funny, if you squint hard enough and tilt your head sideways, that the woman who was once condemned for being too lavish now has her likeness printed on tea tins and macarons. Somewhere, in a perfectly curated Parisian gift shop, You're immortalised in rose-scented bath salts and pastel postcards. Marie Antoinette, former Queen of France, executed for treason, is now a brand, a vibe, an aesthetic. If that isn't history's version of whiplash, what is? But here's where it gets a little surreal. Because while the world was busy commercialising you, turning your image into boutique wallpaper and limited edition handbags, academics were working just as hard to crack open the woman behind the myth. And what they've found isn't the frosty caricature of pre-revolution propaganda, or the doe-eyed waif from costume dramas. No, what they've found is something more complicated, more contradictory, more human. You weren't stupid. That's the first thing historians keep circling back to. You weren't a mindless spender twirling through Versailles with a champagne glass in each hand while France starved. You were shrewd in your own way, clever, if not always wise. You played the court game better than people gave you credit for, especially once you figured out that your survival depended on being more than ornamental. And yet, you weren't wise to the world outside your palace walls. That's the second thing. You misunderstood the people, wildly so. You didn't realise how symbolic your life had become, how much every gown you wore, every rumour you ignored, every coin you flipped for another trinket was being magnified into an indictment. You weren't malicious, you were insulated. And in revolutionary France, that was enough to get you killed. But even the revolution, in its obsession with tearing you down, accidentally created the most enduring version of you. Because that version, Marie the Monster Queen, was too exaggerated not to be questioned. And when the dust settled, people started peeling back the layers. What they found was a woman who never asked for the life she was given. A girl who was sent away at 14, stripped of her name, her culture, her autonomy, and told, "Make France love you." Spoiler, they didn't. But it wasn't all pitchforks and powdered wigs. There's a lesser-known side of your story that's often brushed over. The quieter acts of kindness, the orphans you adopted, the hospitals you funded, the poor families you helped, discreetly without ceremony. These aren't glamorous details. They don't fit neatly into the let them eat cake narrative. But they're there, stubbornly. Small truths with soft edges that complicate the story. And maybe that's what people find so fascinating about you now. You refuse to fit into a single box. You are adored and despised, elegant and naive, maternal and political, stubborn and strategic. Every time someone tries to simplify you, you slip through their fingers like perfume smoke. Which is probably why writers and artists and costume designers keep coming back to you. Your history's most glamorous puzzle. Take your final days, for example. People expected hysteria, screaming, curses. Instead, you gave them grace. You dressed in white, walked calmly to your death, and even managed to apologise to the executioner when you stepped on his foot. That one moment, simple, almost absurd in its politeness, has been analysed endlessly. Was it defiance? Was it dignity? Was it a royal tic too deeply ingrained to suppress? Whatever it was, it haunts the narrative. Because that tiny shred of humanity broke through the propaganda like a pinprick of light. Of course, not everyone is interested in nuance. Your image continues to be twisted and adapted for whatever message people want to send. Political cartoons still use your name as shorthand for elite cluelessness. Marie Antoinette moments get tossed around every time a politician posts a photo of luxury during a recession. You're still, centuries later, a cautionary tale in designer shoes. But there's something else too, something gentler. A quiet reclaiming of your legacy, especially among women. Feminist historians revisit your story and find a thread of tragic agency. You were a teenager forced into political marriage, a foreign queen who endured endless public scrutiny, a mother who lost her children, a woman who was villainized for the very things that male monarchs were forgiven for daily. The criticisms, spending, indulgence, perceived coldness, begin to sound eerily familiar. It's a tale as old as patriarchy. When women step out of line, they get written out, or worse, rewritten as villains. So now students study you with a more critical eye. They debate the fairness of your trial. They explore the gendered nature of the revolution's propaganda. They ask new questions. Why did your maternal image fail to protect you when others were shielded by theirs? Why did you, and not Louis? become the symbol of aristocratic failure. What does it say about power and femininity and control? And the answers, to surprise, aren't simple. You weren't a revolutionary, but you lived at the heart of one. And now you've become a prism through which people can study revolution itself. Not just political, but personal. The revolution of public opinion, of womanhood, of image. You were destroyed by propaganda, and now you're resurrected by it. A symbol torn apart, then stitched back together by every new generation with a fresh agenda and a fascination with your face. There are even entire books dedicated just to your legacy, not your reign, not your scandals, just the aftershocks, the cultural echoes. A 250-year-old ripple still widening across the surface of history. You've become shorthand for the danger of disconnection, yes, but also for the cost of being watched too closely, of being born into the kind of life where every decision is a performance and every misstep becomes legend. Maybe that's your most lasting truth. You never got to be ordinary, not once, not as a child, not as a wife, not as a mother. Every moment of your life was observed, judged, documented. And then, even in death, you didn't disappear. They just kept writing and rewriting. Even now, somewhere a new writer is starting a chapter about you. And you, well, you're still waiting patiently in the pages. There's a strange kind of immortality in being misunderstood, isn't there? You never asked to become a myth, Marie. You didn't volunteer to be a symbol, a scapegoat, or a fashion-forward ghost, floating through centuries of academic papers and costume parties. But history isn't interested in consent. Once your head hit the basket, the world picked it up, metaphorically at least, and began to carve meaning into it. And it turns out, meaning sticks better than truth ever does. The world didn't just remember you, it rearranged you. One of the most persistent rearrangements is the idea that you were heartless, aloof, emotionally untouchable, a cold pearl in a diamond cage. But your letters tell a different story. The ones to your mother, full of insecure hopes and awkward apologies. The ones to your brother, desperate and political. The ones to your children, tender and filled with quiet dread. And most hauntingly, the last one, scrawled with a trembling hand the night before your execution, addressed to Madame Elizabeth. That letter is still preserved, still read aloud in classrooms and museums, and it doesn't scream like your critics did. It whispers, "I pardon my enemies," you wrote. "I die in peace." Who does that? Who, facing a jeering mob and a blade sharpened with rage, chooses forgiveness? That's the moment that softens the edges for a lot of people. Suddenly, you're not just the queen with the mile-high wig, you're a woman with a pulse, you're a mother, a sister, a person who chose dignity when revenge would have been easier, and in that you become complicated. And complicated women? Oh, history doesn't know what to do with them. You're not the only one, of course. There's Cleopatra, still fighting the battle between seductress and strategist. Elizabeth the Win, immortalised as both virgin and iron queen. Catherine de' Medici, caught between poison plots and motherhood. It's a crowded table of misunderstood monarchs, and you fit right in. Petty fours and all. But there's something uniquely modern about your afterlife. Maybe it's because your image was so carefully constructed even during your lifetime. You were the subject of portraits, sure, but also caricatures, smear campaigns, pamphlets, and gossip columns. You were pre-internet viral. Your face, more than your words, did the heavy lifting. It was easier to make you a villain when you were also a canvas, and you were a canvas. Your portraits evolved over time like social media filters. At first, you're regal, formal, untouchable. Then you're young and fresh-faced, wrapped in flowing white muslin, holding roses and children, channeling maternal softness. Later, you're mature, with sharper eyes and darker tones, the queen under siege. Each painting tried to fix you in place, to tell people what to believe about you, and each one failed to capture the whole story. You lived in a time when public image was just beginning to matter in the way it does now, when the performance of royalty was more important than its policies. You were a queen, yes, but also an early celebrity. People wanted to know what you wore, who you danced with, what your hair looked like at last night's ball. They speculated, they exaggerated, they weaponized your life against you long before Twitter existed. It's no wonder your image keeps popping up today. You're built for it. You're a tragic heroine with a killer aesthetic and a complicated backstory. You died dramatically, wore iconic dresses, and left behind just enough letters to fuel centuries of reimaginings. You're cinematic, you're memeable, you're history's high-gloss paradox. And speaking of paradoxes, let's talk about Versailles. The palace you once loathed for its rigidity and theatricality has become your eternal home. Tourists shuffle through the hall of mirrors, whispering your name, squinting at your reflection in gold-framed paintings. The Petty Trianon, your sanctuary, is preserved like a shrine. The Hameau, your pretend village, is now a pastoral curiosity visited by the same types of people who once mocked it. The irony? They sell Marie Antoinette branded soaps there, milk and honey, hand-wrapped in ribbons. You hated Versailles, and now it's your mausoleum. But even as you linger in these grand spaces, your real legacy seems to live in the questions you leave behind. Not the facts of your life, which are now endlessly dissected and footnoted, but the moral puzzles. Should a queen be held responsible for a nation's collapse? Can you be both a victim and a contributor to your own downfall? Was your execution justice or vengeance? People love to draw hard lines around figures like you. Hero or villain, tragic or spoiled, feminist icon or royal airhead, but you refuse to stay on one side of the story. You're the kind of historical figure who demands a second glance, a reread, a footnote that says, actually, it's more complicated. Even your most infamous moment, that cake quote, still stirs debate. And let's set the record straight again while we're here. You didn't say it. Not in those words. Probably not in any words. The phrase predates you by decades. Rousseau mentions it when you were still a toddler in Vienna, but it stuck to you because it felt true to the public. And feelings, unfortunately, have always been louder than facts. But that phrase became shorthand. Not just for you, but for every leader, celebrity, or public figure accused of being out of touch. Let them eat cake is still whispered when someone in power posts a vacation photo during a crisis. Still quoted when billionaires claim poverty is just a mindset. You became the face of disconnection, even though you might have understood more than anyone ever gave you credit for. And so, here you are, centuries later, still part of the conversation. You weren't a saint. You weren't a monster. You were a young woman thrown into a high-stakes world stage without a script and expected to perform flawlessly. You made mistakes, big ones. You indulged. You underestimated. You withdrew. You hoped things would fix themselves. But when the time came to face the worst, you met it with courage. That doesn't absolve everything, but it does deserve remembering. Because in the end, you were more than a crown, more than a hairstyle, more than the phrase you never said. You were Marie. You were human. And history, at its best, is about seeing the humanity inside the myth. There's a moment, quiet, quick, easily missed, when a historical figure stops being a name in a textbook and becomes someone you see. Not just see, but feel. You imagine their breath fogging a winter window, the weight of their thoughts as they lie awake in the dark, the ache of knowing their world is shifting beneath their feet, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. For many people, you, Marie Antoinette, become that figure. Somewhere between the powdered portraits and the falling guillotine blade, they feel you. Not the queen, not the icon, you. And that's the twist in your legacy that no one saw coming, because it turns out your story is oddly modern. The pressure to present a perfect image, the criticism that comes when you step out of line, the judgment of every choice you make, especially when you're a woman, the impossible expectations, the public dissecting your words, your outfits, your facial expressions like forensic scientists looking for flaws. You were dealing with this in 1785, and we're still dealing with it now. If you were alive today, they'd call it a PR crisis. They'd assign you a team of handlers. You'd do a documentary, maybe a social media apology tour, some long-form think piece in a glossy magazine titled Marie Antoinette, Misunderstood, or Just Out of Touch. But in your time, there was no damage control. Just the pamphlets, the gossip, the anonymous sketches of your face contorted into something cruel. The public had made up its mind. You were guilty of everything, including things you hadn't even done. That's where the bitterness creeps in. Because what really happened wasn't a simple story of evil aristocrats and heroic revolutionaries. It was messier than that. You did live in luxury. You were part of a deeply unfair system. But you also tried, in your own limited way, to live a meaningful life inside it. You didn't ask to be queen. You didn't create the debt. You weren't the one writing the tax codes or oppressing the people. But you represented it all, and that in the end was enough. You became the mask they needed to tear off. That's what makes the story of your final months in prison so devastating. Not just the humiliation, the grey dress, the thin mattress, the cold cell, but the loneliness. You were stripped of everything. Your husband gone, your son stolen, your daughter clinging to you, unsure whether the next knock on the door would take her too. You spent hours pacing, writing letters you knew might never be delivered, rehearsing courage for an audience that wanted you to scream and beg and fall apart, but you didn't. Not even when they accused you of incest with your own son. That moment, perhaps the cruelest blow in a long line of degradations, cracked something, but it didn't destroy you. You looked your accusers in the eye and simply said, "I appeal to all mothers." You didn't fight with politics or propaganda. You spoke from the gut. And for a moment, even the courtroom paused. They'd gone too far, and everyone knew it. Still, they sentenced you to death. The walk to the guillotine is in retrospect a cinematic moment. White chemise, hair hacked short, hands bound. Riding in an open cart past the same people who once danced at your balls. You didn't get the dignity of a private death. You were paraded, displayed, offered up like some gruesome sacrifice to the gods of change, and still you walked with your head high. You apologized to the executioner when you stepped on his foot. That wasn't strategy. That was just you. Some say you died like a queen. Others say you died like a woman finally free of expectation. And yet the world kept expecting things from you, even after you were gone. In the years that followed, everyone had their own version of you. The Loyalists made you a saint, a martyr for the sins of France. The Republicans kept you a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when the rich ignore the hungry. Artists painted you in sorrowful pastels. Poets wrote verses about your final breath. Philosophers used you as a metaphor. Tour guides turned your story into spectacle. But your daughter, Marie-Thérèse, told the truth in the only way she could, by surviving. She lived through the grief, through exile, through the endless questions about her parents. She protected what was left of your memory. She guarded your letters. She corrected the rumours. And though she never saw you again, she never let the world forget you were more than a crown and a scandal. You were a mother. You were a person. And now, in classrooms and documentaries, people finally ask the right questions. What did it feel like to be 14 and sent away from home forever? What did it mean to become the face of an empire you didn't control? What does it do to a person to be so publicly loved, then so publicly hated? There are no easy answers. But the fact that we're asking them at all means something, because there are parts of your story that still resonate in unexpected places. Every time a young woman feels pressure to perform perfection, every time someone is criticised for expressing emotion in public, every time a mother is judged for being too cold, too soft, too human, every time a person becomes a symbol and loses their name in the process. You were Marie Antoinette, but you were also just Marie, a girl in a too big world, and the world, for all its progress, still hasn't figured out how to hold space for people like that. So we study you. We stage your life on theatre sets, and in lecture halls, and through digital filters. We try to understand you, even if you didn't always understand yourself, because in your confusion, your mistakes, your elegance, and your downfall, we see ourselves, not the queen part, not the fashion, but the quiet ache of being misunderstood, the crushing pressure to be more than one thing, the fear of failing in public, the fight to hold on to a sliver of identity when everyone else is busy defining you. You never got the ending you deserved, but your story didn't end in that cart, or at the scaffold. It ended the moment we started asking not what you were, but who. It begins with the sound of the wheels on stone, a low and steady rattle, as if death is approaching politely. The final cart ride, not through a garden or down some grand marble staircase, but through the grey arteries of a city that once worshipped your image and now demands your body. Paris is silent in the way only an angry crowd can be. Charged, waiting, breath held like a drawn bow. You, Marie Antoinette, are the main attraction, and you know it. This isn't just an execution, it's a performance. And you, as always, are expected to play your part, but you've stopped performing. Gone is the powdered wig, the elaborate gown, the soft lace gloves. They stripped you of all that. What remains is a plain white chemise, your hair hacked short to clear the guillotine's path, your hands tied behind your back. The rope chafes, but you don't wince. You sit stiffly in the open cart, jolting with every bump in the road, trying not to show the pain in your spine or the terror in your throat. If you tremble, it's from the cold. Or so you tell yourself. The crowd is thick on either side. You hear jeers, of course, shouts of Austrian and murderous and whore that scrape across your ears like gravel. But there are other sounds too. The shuffle of feet, the creak of a wooden sign, a baby crying, someone coughs, a bread vendor hawks his wares because life somehow continues. Some people don't cheer or boo. They just stare, wide-eyed, as if unsure of what they're witnessing. You don't look away. You hold your chin up, your lips pressed into a line so tight it aches. Pride doesn't keep you alive, but it's the last thing they can't take from you. If you're going to die, and you are, then let them remember a queen who did not weep. It's not a long ride, but it feels endless. Past familiar streets, past the old salons, past cafes where your name was once whispered in wonder and now spat like poison. You pass the Tuileries, where your children once played. You wonder, briefly, if Louis Charles is still alive in his filthy prison cell, or if the revolution has already devoured him. You think of your daughter, still locked away, and hope she's not watching this. You hope, selfishly, that no one you loved is watching this. At the Place de la Révolution, the cart creaks to a stop. The guillotine looms, stark against the grey sky, red from recent use. It smells like iron and sweat and history. You stand when they tell you to. You stumble once, your legs stiff from the ride, and as you catch yourself, your foot lands on the executioner's boot. You glance up. He flinches. "Pardon me," you say softly. Your last words, simple, polite, unnecessary. A final echo of the girl raised in Vienna, taught to be gracious even at the end of the world. They guide you up the scaffold. The steps are rough. The wood's splintered from use. You don't trip. You don't cry. You do not look at the crowd. You do not look at the blade. You look ahead, somewhere far away, somewhere no one else can follow. They tie your hands again, tight. They push your head down into the groove. It's colder than you thought it would be. You close your eyes. The blade falls, and just like that, you're gone. History records it clinically. October 16th, 1793. Noon. Execution of Marie Antoinette, former Queen of France, age 37, cause of death, guillotine. Witnessed by thousands. Applause from the crowd. The head displayed, then taken away. Body tossed into a common grave. But what history doesn't record is how the air felt afterward. Thick, strange, unsatisfying. The city did not rejoice. It exhaled. The revolution had taken its queen. The crowd got what it wanted. And yet, something was missing. A silence followed your death that no speech could fill. Even those who hated you most were forced to admit that you met your end with courage. It complicated things. It cracked the neat little story they'd built around you. Villains aren't supposed to die with dignity. There's a famous passage, written by someone who watched you die, that says, "She climbed the scaffold like she was ascending a throne." That one line rewrote everything. Suddenly you weren't just a condemned woman. You were a queen again, if only for a few seconds. Of course, Paris moved on. Robespierre's reign rolled on. More heads fell. Noble, poor, innocent, guilty. The guillotine didn't discriminate. It was fast, efficient, and always hungry. Eventually the terror turned on itself. Robespierre went to the same scaffold the following year. He didn't die with your grace. Few did. Your remains were dumped in a mass grave at the Madeleine Cemetery. Your body buried without ceremony, your head not even returned to it. They didn't even mark the spot, just dirt. Later, grass. It wasn't until 1815, after the Bourbon monarchy was restored, that they tried to piece you back together. Literally. Louis XVI ordered the exhumation of your and Louis XVI's remains, or what they thought were your remains, fragments, bones, a few strands of hair. They gave you a proper burial at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, the resting place of French royalty. They built a white marble tomb with your name etched in gold. A statue stands above it, eyes lifted toward heaven, robes billowing in imagined wind, elegant, silent. You'd have hated it. Not the gesture, maybe you'd have appreciated the dignity, but the fact that even in death someone else was sculpting your image. Even your grave became part of the performance. But it did matter. People came. Some knelt. Some wept. Some whispered prayers. Not all for you, of course. Some for what they'd lost. A world, a past, a kind of order they didn't even realise they valued until it was gone. You became a symbol again. Not of monarchy, but of memory. And what a strange memory you are. The girl queen who liked music and dancing. The fashion icon who shaped industries without meaning to. The mother who lost her children. The prisoner who kept her head high. The queen who said nothing when silence said it all. You didn't die a hero. You didn't die a villain. You died a person with history watching. And history? It blinked. Funny how the thing you never said became the only thing most people know you for. Let them eat cake. It lingers like the smell of old perfume. Too sweet and too persistent, floating in rooms you never walked into. You didn't say it, not then, not ever. There's no letter, no witness, no official record. In fact, the phrase appears in Rousseau's Confessions, written before you even set foot in France. But truth has never been your strongest ally, and myths, it turns out, are stickier than facts. Still, let's talk about it, since we must. You're a teenager when you arrive in France, still learning the language, still wrapping your head around the absurd rules of Versailles. Bow to the blood, not the title. Never turn your back on the king, and for heaven's sake, don't speak unless spoken to. You're not reading grain reports, you're not sitting in on treasury meetings, and you're definitely not scoffing at starving peasants from a rose-petal bath while nibbling bonbons. You're trying to survive a world that's already decided you're too foreign, too frivolous, too much. And yet, the legend clings. Why? Because it's clean. It's elegant. It gives the revolution a villain it can serve on a silver platter. The image is just too good. A queen so clueless, so extravagantly disconnected that she hears about bread riots and suggests dessert. It doesn't matter that it makes no political sense. It feels true. And feeling, when it comes to public outrage, always wins. The phrase caught fire in the revolutionary pamphlets. The libelles, those salacious, wildly popular booklets passed from hand to hand like gossip laced with gunpowder. You were a favourite target. They painted you as a nymphomaniac, a traitor, a witch, a succubus draped in silk. But let them eat cake? That was the crown jewel. With just 5 words, they didn't need to prove anything else. You were out of touch. Case closed. It's the power of narrative. Your enemies understood it well. They crafted a version of you that was simple, snide, and easy to hate. Never mind the complexity. Never mind the quiet charity donations, the homes for unwed mothers, the orphan you adopted. Those stories didn't sell. The cake one did. It still does. It's printed on mugs, stitched on tote bags, slapped on t-shirts. It's quoted by comedians, politicians, and people who can't quite remember which queen you were, but know you were definitely the cake one. You've been parodied in cartoons, in political memes, in Broadway lyrics. You're a punchline that refuses to die. Somewhere along the line, the phrase stopped being about you and became about something bigger. The gap between the powerful and the powerless. The myth turned metaphor. Let them eat cake isn't just a historical inaccuracy. It's a rallying cry, a warning, a shorthand for indifference in high places. And ironically, that's made you immortal. So maybe it's time to reclaim it, not as a quote, but as a symbol. Because while the phrase may be false, the feeling behind it, the disconnect, the frustration, the desperation of people crying out to a system that doesn't hear them, is very real. You lived through that. even if you were on the wrong side of it. You felt the revolution at your door. You heard it in the screams outside Versailles, in the silence of your son's prison cell, in the rattle of your own carriage on the way to the scaffold. You knew, eventually, what it meant to be powerless, and if nothing else, that experience, the fall, the reckoning, makes you more than a villain. It makes you a mirror. Here's a thought. What if the phrase stuck, not just because it was cruel, but because it had a grain of emotional truth? You were insulated. You did live in a world where the walls were thick with velvet and gossip, not hunger. You did struggle to understand the fury of the people, at least at first. Maybe the quote survived because it said in one neat line what people feared about all rulers, that they don't see us, that they never will, and you became the poster child for that fear. But people also forget how much effort you put into rebranding yourself, how, when the criticism grew louder, you retreated from extravagance. You wore simpler gowns, posed in portraits as a mother, not a monarch. You stopped hosting the expensive balls. You lived more modestly, but by then it was too late. The image had been locked in place. The cake had already been served. And honestly, it's hard to blame people for being skeptical of your transformation. Even when you tried to present yourself as of the people, it was through a carefully staged version of rustic charm. The Hameau de la Reine, your little fake village, was lovely, yes, but it wasn't real. The milkmaids were actresses. The animals were washed. The whole place was a pastoral dreamscape where the grass was just wild enough to look untamed, but never muddy enough to ruin your shoes. People didn't see an attempt at humility. They saw performance, and maybe it was a performance. But what else could you do? You were born into spectacle. You had no tools for subtlety, no training in quiet authenticity. Your life had always been an audience, so you did what you'd been taught, dress the part, smile for the portrait, try to fix the public mood with gestures, because it's all you ever had. What no one teaches you as a queen is how to be human in public. And that's all the people wanted. That's the cruel irony of your story. You were hated for not being relatable, but no one ever gave you the chance to be real. The moment you arrived in France, they saw what they wanted to see. An Austrian, a brat, a symbol. The real you, shy, funny, anxious, sometimes brilliant, sometimes petty. Never stood a chance. And now, you're trapped in a 5-word sentence you never said. So what would you have said? Not, let them eat cake. Maybe something closer to, I didn't know how bad it was. Or, I thought things would get better. Or maybe just, I'm sorry. Not because you caused it all, but because you were part of a system that did. Because you lived high while others starved low. Because even if you didn't invent the injustice, you benefited from it. That's the part history's starting to understand now. That guilt isn't always about intention. Sometimes it's just about presence. And so, the cake remains, bitter, misquoted, frosted with irony, but still yours, whether you like it or not. If there was a business that truly boomed during the years leading up to and through the French Revolution, it wasn't textile or grain or even weapons. It was slander, pure industrial-grade weaponized defamation. And you, Marie Antoinette, were its top-selling product. Long before hashtags and tabloid exposés, there was a thriving underground industry devoted entirely to your humiliation. It didn't just chip away at your reputation, it demolished it, rebuilt it as grotesque satire, then sold it back to the public for the price of a pamphlet or a whispered scandal. They called them libelles, these little printed attacks. At first glance, they looked harmless. Cheap paper, woodcut illustrations, ink that smudged at the edges. But inside, filth, lies, obsessions. The kind of stories that made you double-check whether the authors had ever actually seen another human being up close. You weren't just accused of extravagance anymore. You were accused of depravity, corruption, treason, incest, orgies, devil worship, and pretty much every sin on the inventory list. It wasn't enough that you wore too much silk. Now you were sleeping with your brother-in-law, with your ladies-in-waiting, with random palace guards, with foreign agents. In one pamphlet, you're presented as the leader of an all-female political sex cult, complete with coded hand signals and ceremonial robes. Another describes in great detail how you bathe in milk while dictating orders to starve the poor. You can't win. You're either too prude or too promiscuous, too cold or too cunning, always too something. And the art, oh, the art. If history had an award for most deranged political cartoon collection, you'd sweep it. You were drawn with horns, with fangs, with bulging eyes and animalistic features. They gave you an exaggerated nose, a twisted grin, breasts spilling over with sinister intent. In many of them, you're shown devouring France itself, usually quite literally. One image shows you gobbling up a roast pig labelled The People, licking your fingers with glee. This wasn't satire. It was character assassination by 1,000 sketches. What's worse? It worked. People who had never met you, who had never come within 100 miles of Versailles, believed these stories. They passed them along like bedtime tales for the angry and disenfranchised. Did you hear what the Queen did this week? I saw it in a pamphlet. Disgusting. She's not even French, you know. These rumours became truth in the minds of the masses, and truth, when twisted, becomes something far more dangerous. Conviction. It wasn't just about you anymore. You had become a symbol of everything France wanted to purge. Decadence, foreignness, indifference, corruption, femininity. Yes, femininity. Because make no mistake, the slander against you wasn't just political. It was deeply gendered. Your power, such as it was, had to be sexualized and demonized in order to be destroyed. A strong queen, unthinkable, but a manipulative seductress, perfect, that they could tear down without guilt. Modern scholars call it the birth of the smear campaign, and in many ways it was. The libelles were early PR, warfare, pre-internet, pre-photography, but no less effective. If anything, they were more visceral because they left so much to the imagination. There were no videos to disprove the lies, no voice recordings, no interviews, just paper, ink, and fury. You became a blank canvas for projection. Poor people projected their hunger onto your indulgence. Radical thinkers projected their fury onto your perceived power. Moralists projected their fears of female independence onto your sexuality. You were a mirror reflecting whatever people feared most in themselves and their collapsing world. But what hurt most wasn't the lies. It was the way they made your truth invisible. Because there was another version of you. The woman your family knew. The one who played music in the evenings, who doted on her children, who walked barefoot in the garden to feel something real. That woman didn't make headlines. That woman didn't sell pamphlets. She was too quiet, too soft, too human. And history doesn't like its villains to be human. Somewhere deep in the Temple prison, in the long echoing nights after Louis was gone and your son was taken, you must have thought about those stories, the things they were saying, the lies being carved into history like they were facts. Did you feel angry, hopeless? Did you pray they'd be forgotten, or that someone someday would tell the truth? Here's the irony. They never forgot the lies. But they did start telling the truth. Not right away, of course. For decades after your death, the filth lingered. Even in post-revolution France, even under Napoleon, the image of you as a decadent seductress clung like mould. It wasn't until the 19th century that historians began peeling it back, reading your letters, interviewing survivors, analysing not the gossip but the records, and slowly, painfully, the real Marie Antoinette began to emerge. Not a saint, not a monster, but a person. Even today, your slander lives on in the digital corners of history. Search your name, and the memes come up before the facts. But alongside them, there's been a reckoning. Feminist historians now point to your defamation as a case study in how powerful women are punished, how sexuality is wielded as a weapon, how propaganda creates real consequences. Because that's the thing about the libelles. They didn't just ruin your reputation. They helped kill you. They fueled the rage that put you in the cart, and long after your body was gone, the words kept cutting. But now, the narrative is shifting. People ask better questions. They understand the context. They read between the lines. They see the machinery of misogyny and manipulation for what it was. And in that, they begin to see you, not the painted whore of the pamphlets, but the woman trying to breathe through a life she didn't choose. That maybe is your quiet revenge, not through power or glory, but through recognition. Because the truth, though late, is patient. and it never really dies. It's strange to think that you, a queen decapitated over 2 centuries ago, would eventually become the darling of fashion magazines. Not just history books, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, style blogs, runways, Instagram mood boards. Your face, once slashed across pamphlets in grotesque caricature, now graces silk scarves and perfume bottles. Your legacy, once synonymous with oblivious royalty and public rage, now floats through fashion shows in swaths of tulle, embroidered corsets, and hand-stitched roses. Somewhere in all this, Marie, you became cool. You've entered that rare and absurd realm of being both dead and trend-setting. It started small. The posthumous portraits, the delicate pastels, the soft, dreamy reinterpretations of your life. And then Sofia Coppola's 2006 film cracked it wide open. The soundtrack, all post-punk and indie rock. The palette, frosted lavender, robin's egg blue, sugar-dusted peach. You were played by Kirsten Dunst in layers of silk, lounging barefoot while snacking on La Durée macarons that weren't even invented until 1930. It was inaccurate, it was defiant, and it worked. Suddenly Marie Antoinette wasn't just a historical figure, she was an aesthetic, and oh, how the world loves an aesthetic. There's now a whole corner of the internet, tiny, candlelit and glittering, dedicated entirely to your vibe. They call it Rococo Core, Royal Core, Decadent Vintage. Tumblr blogs layered with dreamy edits of you and your Versailles companions, floating in gauze through the hall of mirrors, surrounded by swans and pearls and pastel desserts. TikTok creators dress in 18th century inspired gowns, lips painted soft rose, hair teased into sky-high towers, mouthing lines from your fictionalized life. Most of them know you only in fragments. But the fragments are enough. You've become shorthand for indulgence, for tragic beauty, for a life lived too glamorously to survive. And here's the twist. A lot of it is sympathetic. They see you as a misunderstood icon, a trapped bird in a golden cage, a young woman expected to perform perfection while being devoured by public scrutiny. If that sounds familiar, it's because it is. The pressures you lived under, idealized femininity, impossible standards, judgment from all sides, never really went away. They just got shinier phones and faster news cycles. You'd have loathed some of it, of course. The idea of your face on a novelty handbag, your silhouette reimagined as a Funko Pop figurine. But maybe, just maybe, you'd have smiled at the girls who wear their hair high and their hopes higher, who channel your softness and strength as armour, who quote you not because you were a queen, but because you were brave in the end. Because buried beneath all that sugar-frosted styling is a woman people relate to. There's a kind of radical empathy in how younger generations have reimagined you, not as a tyrant, but as someone overwhelmed. Someone born into a role they didn't choose, someone who made mistakes, who got it wrong, who reacted rather than ruled. Someone who faced public shame and responded with quiet poise. They don't excuse everything you did, but they understand it. And that understanding is a form of redemption. Even in academic circles, your life is being re-evaluated through new lenses. Gender studies, trauma studies, cultural history, they all pick at the layers of your image. What does it mean to be seen but not heard? To be turned into a symbol so young you forget what your own voice sounds like? To be hated for things you never said, never did, just because your existence made other people uncomfortable? You were once reduced to a single sentence. Now finally you're being given paragraphs, and not just for your mistakes. Your cultural impact, oddly enough, is expansive. Fashion historians credit you with helping usher in the shift from rigid court styles to the flowing empire waist gowns that would define the turn of the century. The chemise à la reine, your infamous underwear dress, was scandalous at first, but it became a revolution in itself. Light, breathable, feminine without the scaffolding. You wore it for comfort. The world eventually wore it for freedom. Even your gardens, the hameau, with its staged peasant village and idealized farming life, have sparked debates in art history and architecture. Yes, it was ridiculous, but it also reflected the Enlightenment's fascination with nature, simplicity, and the tension between civilization and authenticity. You were indulging in fantasy, yes, but so was everyone else. You just had the budget. And let's not forget your influence on consumer culture. You were a celebrity before the term existed, Your every fashion choice replicated in salons and sewing rooms across Paris. Jewelers, dressmakers, hairstylists, they all orbited around you like planets around a well-powdered sun. It's no wonder modern brands try to link themselves to your name. If you were alive today, you'd have a brand deal with Dior, a candle line, and definitely a signature perfume. In fact, you kind of already do. There's an actual Marie Antoinette fragrance. Several, in fact. Some claim to be based on recipes from your personal collection. Rose, jasmine, orange blossom, soft, expensive, and unapologetically feminine. They promise to bottle not just a scent, but a feeling. Luxury tinged with longing. Power laced with sadness. The smell of a girl who once ruled the room and then lost everything. Because at the heart of all this, beneath the layers of costume and commentary, is your story. One that refuses to fade because it was never just about politics. It was about identity, performance, pressure, beauty, guilt, survival. You became a queen. You became a villain. You became a meme. But now you're something else. A mirror. And people keep looking into it, searching for themselves in the reflection. And maybe that's your greatest legacy, not the fashions, not the scandals, not even the tragedy, but the way your story keeps inviting people to ask, what would I have done in her place? Would I have stood straighter, spoken louder, given up faster? Would I have been braver? The answers shift, the questions remain, and you, Marie Antoinette, ever evolving, ever reframed, remain with them. Long after your death, long after the dust settled over revolution, and blood-soaked cobblestones turned to garden paths again, you linger, not just in stories or statues, but in the bones of France. There's something spectral about your presence, Marie. It's not just memory, it's atmosphere. You haunt Versailles, not like a ghost tapping on windows, but like perfume soaked into brocade, like a shadow etched into a sunlit wall. People feel you. They don't always know why, but you're there, braided into the place itself. Walk the marble halls of the palace, and you can almost hear the silk of your gown whispering behind you. The floorboards, worn in just the right spots, remember your steps. Your bedchamber, still preserved, is framed with velvet ropes and reverence. Tourists lean in close to see where you slept, where you gave birth in front of an audience, where you played the part of queen until the role turned to ash. They whisper, they snap photos, some even cry. And outside in the gardens, your presence deepens. The Petty Trianon, your personal retreat, your one corner of Versailles where you could pretend for a moment that you were not on stage, is still intact. A pale little gem nestled among trees and water features, elegant without being overwhelming. It smells like roses and nostalgia. You used to read there, breathe there, escape. And then there's the Hameau, your play village of curated simplicity. Historians still argue over it. Was it a grotesque indulgence, a parody of rural life, or was it a desperate attempt at normalcy? The truth, as usual with you, is complicated. It was silly, no question, but it was also revealing. You weren't mocking the poor. You were trying to understand something you'd never known. Peace without pageantry, the quiet dignity of privacy. People come now to marvel at it. They frown at the manicured thatched roofs and spotless barnyards. Some shake their heads, others grin. Because even now it's hard to look at your little farm and not feel that tug, that desire to step outside of everything and just be. Maybe that's the most relatable part of you. But not all your remnants are so romantic. In Paris, you're remembered in pieces. The conciergerie, your final prison, has become a solemn museum. People file through its stone corridors, reverent and hushed, reading plaques, staring at the cell where you awaited death. It's been restored, staged with mannequins and replica furniture. Tourists stand in silence, some awkward, some awed. It's not comfortable. It's not meant to be. The revolution is still a raw nerve in France. Glorious, shameful, necessary, brutal, it lives in paradox. The people needed change desperately. But the cost was staggering. And you, whether they love you or loathe you, are part of that cost. You're a fracture in the national mirror. A reminder that things weren't always fair, and that violence doesn't always purify. French schoolchildren still learn about you. Sometimes you're a footnote in the fall of the Ancien Regime. Other times, you're a whole chapter. Fascinating, tragic, problematic. Some teachers humanize you. Others reduce you to the cake quote. It depends on the day, the school, the mood of the curriculum. But wherever your name comes up, it sticks. There's also the question of your grave. The Basilica of Saint-Denis, where French royalty sleeps beneath stone and shadow, is where your remains were reinterred. After years in an unmarked pit, you were given marble and ceremony. Louis, too. Visitors leave flowers. Some pray. Others just stare, wondering what it must have been like, how it felt to go from throne to guillotine to myth. Your tomb bears no bitterness. It's quiet, understated even. A figure carved in repose, draped in stone robes, eyes turned skyward. If you were to wake up there centuries later, you might be surprised at the restraint. No garish jewels, no grandiose inscriptions, just a name, a date, silence. And still, outside those stone walls, you continue to move people. Writers return to your story again and again, reworking your timeline like a favourite song. Some cast you as a martyr of femininity, others as a cautionary tale of disconnected privilege. Biographers dig through your letters, your receipts, your appointment books, trying to decipher the real you. Sometimes they get close, often they don't. Then there's the merchandise. Let's not pretend it's all high-minded reverence. You're still on everything from novelty playing cards to scented drawer liners, tea sets, plush dolls. A Japanese fashion brand once did a whole line inspired by your gowns, complete with towering hairpieces and lace parasols. You've been pixelated into video games, turned into an anime heroine, even turned up as a drag performance. Your influence is elastic, expanding, bending, adapting. You would probably laugh, or groan, or both. Because you knew better than most how ridiculous fame could be. You lived it, every exhausting day. The need to smile when you wanted to scream. The pressure to entertain even when your heart was breaking. The feeling that your real self was shrinking day by day into something invisible. And now people claim to know you because they wore a costume inspired by you at Halloween, or because they saw a tweet, or because they read one dramatic anecdote and built an entire opinion around it. If you were alive to tweet back, you'd probably say, "It's more complicated than that. Isn't it always?" Because the truth is, you're not just the past. You're part of the present too, in a world obsessed with image, scrutiny, performance. You're a patron saint of misunderstood women everywhere. Not flawless, not excused, but known. At last, and maybe that's enough. You didn't get justice exactly, but you got remembrance. You didn't get peace, but you got resonance. And long after the powder settled, you got something rarer than redemption. You got a second look. Legacy is such a slippery thing. You don't get to shape it. Not really. Not once you're gone. People sift through the rubble of your life, pick out the bits they like best and hold them up to the light. They trim away the rest. So much of your story, Marie, has been chiselled by others. Journalists, historians, costume designers, political thinkers, even the algorithms of modern media. In some versions, you're the tragic queen, dignified to the end. In others, you're a cautionary tale dressed in gold, dancing obliviously while the world burns. And the truth? It's somewhere in between, still breathing beneath the costume jewellery. Even today, your life is a magnet for reinterpretation. New books surface every year, some sympathetic, others scathing. One paints you as a proto-feminist trapped by the rules of a patriarchal court. Another accuses you of deep political incompetence masked by silk and superficial charm. There are films, novels, even operas. You appear in theatre, in satire, in speculative fiction. One author imagined you surviving the revolution and starting over under a false name. Another had you reappear as a ghost, haunting the palace with quiet, mournful footsteps. You're no longer just a person. You're a story engine. People can't stop telling you. And here's the thing. They're not all wrong. They just each hold a different shard of the broken mirror. Some emphasize your youth, your vulnerability. Others zoom in on your spending, your failure to grasp the weight of the moment. But what they all seem to miss is how human your choices were. You were scared. You were unsure. You were trying to balance a crown that kept slipping sideways. You wanted to be adored, and when that failed, you just wanted to be left alone. Sound familiar? It should, because your story isn't locked in the 18th century. It's being lived out now, in boardrooms, on red carpets, in classrooms, on social media platforms where every misstep is punished in real time. People still perform versions of themselves for public approval. Women still get dragged through mud for being too ambitious, too fashionable, too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too expensive. You were one of the first to live that experience in full view, and now the rest of us have just caught up. You're even showing up in political debates. There's a cycle. Every few years, when public anger spikes over income inequality or leadership scandals, someone resurrects your name. You become the go-to reference for oblivious elite behaviour. It's a Marie Antoinette moment, pundits say. Whenever a celebrity posts a yacht photo during a crisis, you're invoked in speeches, on picket signs, in angry comment sections. It's like being summoned from the grave to stand trial again, only now it's global. But that doesn't mean people hate you. In fact, more than ever, you've become a symbol of complexity. A woman crushed by expectations, by image, by timing. You were born into a role that was already rigged. Queen of France at a time when France itself was breaking apart. You were tasked with healing a wound that had been festering for generations, and when you couldn't, they blamed you for the infection. What were you supposed to do? You weren't trained to rule, you were trained to sparkle. And maybe that's the crux of it. People finally see the disconnect between the role you were given and the reality you faced. They recognise the panic in your letters, the loneliness, the claustrophobia of constant performance. They understand how trying to be loved can make you make strange decisions, frivolous ones. Ones that feel shallow until you realise they're just desperate attempts at control in a life where you had so little of it. There's even academic work now that argues you were among the most written about women of your time because you threatened the idea of what a woman should be. You were too visible, too influential, too different. A foreign queen, married into a monarchy in crisis, blamed for everything from war to wardrobe malfunctions. You weren't just disliked, you were useful to dislike. Scapegoats always are, and yet you're still here, in lectures, in poems, in memes, in museums. You've become part of the cultural furniture, rearranged as needed, never fully packed away. In a strange way, it's a kind of immortality. Not the soft, noble one of marble busts and stained glass, but a messy, breathing kind. Your life continues to be debated, reperformed, reclaimed. Even Versailles has leaned into your myth. There are tours framed around your life, exhibits on your fashion, digital recreations of your chambers, complete with ambient music and candlelight. There's a themed hotel suite named after you in Paris, all brocade and gilt. Cafes serve Marie Antoinette cake with sugared violets. The whole aesthetic of you, pale blue, powdered, petal-scented, has become a commercial dream. And yet, what haunts people isn't the frosting. It's the look in your eyes during those final portraits. Not fear, though that's in there too, but clarity. A certain resigned steel. The performance was ending, the role was over, and in its place, for the first time, maybe people caught a glimpse of the woman underneath. Not the queen, not the caricature, but you. And that glimpse, brief, unfinished, has kept people coming back for centuries. So your legacy? It isn't one idea. It's a tangle, a contradiction, a shimmering question mark at the end of a very long sentence. And maybe that's how it should be. Because if history were honest, it wouldn't offer neat endings. It would offer mirrors, uncomfortable ones. And your story, with all its silk and sorrow, is one of the clearest we've got. Not because you were perfect, but because you weren't. There's a certain irony in how you, the queen accused of being oblivious to the cries of the starving, are now used as a voice for them. That's one of the more unexpected turns your legacy has taken, Marie. Once cast as the embodiment of privilege gone rotten, you're now sometimes invoked in documentaries, protests, and essays as a case study in how systems fail, not just because the people in charge are cruel, but because they're cut off, cocooned, distracted by polished mirrors while everything outside burns. People look at your life, your downfall, and see patterns repeating. Not the powdered wigs and gilded staircases, but the disconnection. The inability or unwillingness to recognise the rumble beneath the surface. You've become a metaphor in slow motion, a warning label printed in brocade. Every time someone in power ignores the storm clouds gathering on the edge of the estate, your name echoes. And yet there's also this other thread running right beside it. One more personal, less political. You've become a quiet icon of survival. Not survival in the heroic sense, because you didn't survive, not physically, but emotional survival, grace under scrutiny. The way you stood, not when you were adored, but when you were hated. Not when you were dressed in diamonds, but when you were barefoot on the scaffold. That's the part that sticks with people, not the cakes or corsets, but the silence you kept in the face of absolute humiliation. Some see in you the story of how women are expected to carry the burdens of an empire, then blamed for its collapse. You weren't an empress like Catherine the Great or a regent like Elizabeth II. You didn't rule armies or sign declarations, but you were watched, constantly, judged for how you walked, how you smiled, how you gestured. Your worth was weighed in fabric and fertility. Your decisions were dissected down to the tilt of a fan. And when things went wrong, because of debt, war, famine, centuries of mismanagement, it was easier to point at your dresses than the decades of dysfunction that preceded you. You, as a queen consort, were never meant to rule France. That was Louis's job. But Louis didn't capture imaginations the way you did. He wasn't glamorous, wasn't scandalous, wasn't visibly flawed in a way people could latch onto. You were. You cried at the opera. You wore muslin instead of satin. You retreated from ceremony when you could, tried to mother your children in private when Versailles demanded public performance. You broke the image, and the world never forgave you for it. There's a peculiar kind of loneliness in being turned into a symbol. It's not just isolation, it's distortion. Your real thoughts, your fears, your daily worries, all of them buried under headlines and hearsay. You became a canvas, and once people start painting over you, they rarely stop. And yet, sometimes, when the noise fades, a few of your own words still rise to the surface. The letter you wrote in prison, for example, just hours before your execution. You didn't rant, you didn't beg, you didn't list grievances, you expressed love. You wrote of your faith, your sorrow, your hope that your children would survive. You asked for forgiveness, not because you thought yourself guilty, but because you understood the weight of history. You understood you were stepping into something larger than personal blame, and that's what people don't expect. Not the tragedy, but the clarity. You could have raged. You didn't. You could have named names. You didn't. You left this world with dignity, even when it offered you none. And now, the conversation around you has shifted. It's less about what you wore and more about why you were such a lightning rod. Scholars ask, why was Marie the one? Why did the revolution fixate on you when there were so many other culprits? Why was the Queen, with no formal power, demonised more than the king, the ministers, the clergy? The answer, of course, isn't simple. But much of it circles back to gender, to the discomfort people feel when women stray too far from the roles written for them. You weren't maternal enough, political enough, humble enough, French enough. You were, in every sense, too much. And too much, women rarely fare well in the public eye. So your downfall became performative, a public unmasking, not just to punish you, but to restore the idea that a woman should know her place. And yet, the irony is, you did know your place. You just didn't accept its limitations. When you lost everything, you didn't beg the mob to spare you. You didn't throw your jewels at their feet. You didn't scream. You straightened your back, climbed the scaffold, and became something more dangerous than a villain. You became dignified. And in doing so, you complicated the narrative. You turned the people who hated you into spectators of your poise. Even your enemies had to admit you met your death better than most men would have. That final act, silent and restrained, rewrote something. Not enough to save you, but enough to echo. Now, when people remember you, it's with mixed emotions. You still represent excess, but also injustice. Vanity, but also victimhood. Power, but also powerlessness. You're no longer a flat figure in a powdered wig. You are a contradiction, a question mark. A woman everyone thought they knew, until they started reading between the lines. And that's where your legacy lives now, in the in-between. In the footnotes, the grey areas, the re-examinations. You're studied not as a cautionary tale, but as a case study in public perception, in propaganda, in the burden of femininity. You're used to teach how power is shaped, and often how it is imagined. Because you never ruled France, but you were made to answer for all of it. And still, you remained, even in pieces, even in silence. Maybe that's why you endure. Not because you were perfect, but because you were endlessly rereadable. Somewhere out there right now, on a train in Tokyo, or a cafe in New York, or a sunlit library in Vienna, someone is reading about you for the first time. Maybe it's for a school project. Maybe it's because they watched a movie where you looked like a dream in silk and wanted to know what really happened. Maybe they stumbled across your portrait while scrolling late at night, caught by the softness of your eyes and wondering what went on behind them. However it starts, it always ends the same. Curiosity becomes obsession. Your story pulls people in, like a thread they can't stop tugging. And when they reach the end, it doesn't feel like closure. It feels like a door left ajar. Because your life never really ends. Not in the emotional sense. It loops. It lingers. It latches onto something in the present and refuses to let go. Maybe it's your youth. You were only 14 when you left Austria, still a child, barely old enough to understand what you were being traded for. The enormity of your future was disguised in lace and etiquette lessons. By the time you realised the weight of it all, it was too late. That part sticks with people, especially younger ones. They see a teenager expected to become a queen, a diplomat, a mother, and a symbol, all without a say in the matter. It's not just history, it's the architecture of pressure. Then there's your attempt to carve out identity within that pressure, the way you decorated your own spaces, commissioned your own portraits, curated your public image long before branding was a buzzword. Your taste shaped everything, from hair trends in Paris to the way European courts styled their daughters. And yet, as soon as you expressed yourself too much, they called you vain, selfish, frivolous. It's a tightrope familiar to women even now. Be graceful, but not cold. Fashionable, but not excessive. Maternal, but never weak. Powerful, but not intimidating. You walk that rope for years, and when you fell, people cheered like it was a sport. But that's not what defines you now. In the centuries since your death, the balance has slowly shifted. More and more, people look past the caricature and into the letters, the diaries, the silence between speeches. They see not a villain, but a woman caught in the gears of something much bigger than herself. A woman blamed for decisions she didn't make, hated for luxuries she was born into, used as a scapegoat for a kingdom's long-rotting wounds. Historians today are careful. They talk about systems, not single figures. They point out how the monarchy had been teetering for decades before you ever stepped foot in Versailles. They unpack the financial ruin caused by France's involvement in foreign wars, especially the American Revolution, which Louis enthusiastically bankrolled. They emphasise that the anger of the people wasn't irrational, it was earned. But the choice to focus that rage on you, that was personal. And it still raises questions we haven't figured out how to answer. Why is it so easy to hate women in power, even symbolic power? Why do we tear down those who seem above us, not because of what they've done, but because of what they represent? Why are women so often reduced to a single moment, a single mistake, a single quote, true or not? People look at your life and see the prototype. The first public woman torn apart in print, gossiped about in headlines, turned into a scapegoat for a generation's discontent. Today we see it with celebrities, politicians, influencers. The speed at which someone becomes adored, then hated, then ridiculed. It's dizzying. But it started with women like you, and yet, somehow, you're still here. Not in the tabloid way, not just as a joke or a dress or a meme, but in the deeper conversations. You're part of discussions on gender, image, politics, privilege. You're taught alongside revolutions and rebellions, not as a side note, but as a central thread. Because your fall wasn't just a royal tragedy. It was a rupture in the way people understood power, what it looks like, who gets to wield it, and what happens when the people watching say, "No more," That's the thing people forget about revolutions. They need symbols. And you were the perfect one. A foreign queen, a lavish lifestyle, a refusal to speak publicly during a time of public crisis. It didn't matter that the truth was more nuanced. It never does. Revolutions run on emotion, not footnotes, but even symbols leave traces of the person beneath. In your letters, we see it. In your last words, in the way you held your son's hand for as long as they let you, in the way you wore simpler gowns, quietly donated to hospitals, tried to retreat from the court you never wanted to lead. These aren't the actions of a monster. They're the actions of someone trying, clumsily, quietly, to live. It's not about excusing you. You lived in obscene luxury while others starved. You didn't always listen. You misjudged the people, the politics, the pressure. You made choices that hurt your reputation and fueled resentment. But you also didn't create the system that protected you. You just inherited it. And when it fell apart, you fell with it. Gracefully, yes, but not unscathed. That's what keeps people coming back to your story. It's not the gowns or the jewels or even the guillotine. It's the emotional weight. The girl who became a queen. The queen who became a prisoner. The prisoner who walked to her death and said only, "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it," after stepping on her executioner's foot. Even in that final moment you were polite. That one gesture has inspired essays, plays, entire chapters in books. Because it was simple, human, in all the noise and horror, it was a reminder. You were just a person. And once we remember that, we have to start asking better questions. Not just what happened, but why. Not just who was she, but what does she mean? And somehow, in asking those questions, we get closer to understanding ourselves. So here we are, at the end of the road, or at least the road we can walk from here. Your head has long been separated from your body. Your silk gowns turned to dust. Your palaces turned to tourist destinations with headsets and velvet ropes. But you, Marie Antoinette, have never really left. Not in the way most people leave. You linger like a smudge on glass, part reflection, part distortion. Every time someone says your name, they summon the echo of a woman who never had a chance to speak for herself in full. There's something magnetic about your story. Not because it's simple, it isn't. If anything, it's all tangle and contradiction. The arc of your life bends away from logic and toward feeling. You were born into power, yes, but power laced with fragility, with scrutiny, with performance. You were elevated and silenced, adored and vilified, praised for beauty and punished for everything else. You were made to be watched but never really seen, and that maybe is what's kept people fascinated for more than 2 centuries. Not the crown, not the execution, but the gaps, the questions, the pieces that don't add up, the very human urge to go back and figure out what really happened and why. Because let's be honest, history didn't do you many favours. It took the version of you that was easiest to hate and ran with it. Let them eat cake, let them eat lies, let them consume a caricature so satisfying that the truth felt unnecessary. The mob didn't kill the queen. It killed the myth of the perfect monarch, and you just happened to be holding the script at the time. And now the myth is under review. Modern audiences, with their endless thirst for nuance, are pulling your story back out into the light. They're not always kind, but they are curious. And curiosity is a better form of remembrance than flattery. It means people want to know, not just what you wore, but what you thought. Not just where you failed, but where you resisted. Not just how you died, but how you endured. It's weird, isn't it? You lived in a world where everything was designed to suppress your individuality. Your name was stitched into contracts before you could write it yourself. Your days were scheduled by courtiers. Your marriages, your pregnancies, your very existence, all dictated by protocol and perception. You were a vessel, expected to produce heirs and keep quiet, and yet somehow you left a fingerprint, a residue, something unmistakably you. People think about your laughter, how you giggled too much for a queen, or your handwritten notes in the margins of dull letters, doodling flowers when you were bored. They remember the way you held your daughter close when they came for your husband, the way you kept your dignity while everything else was stripped away. They remember the way you tried, awkwardly, imperfectly, to be real in a world that only wanted a symbol. And of course, they remember the walk, that last one, Through the streets, hair cropped, hands tied, jaw set. People watched, expecting drama, tears, screams. Instead, you gave them silence, stillness, a quiet refusal to let them break you before the blade did. What a final act. If your life were a novel, that would be the last page. But history doesn't end that cleanly. Your legacy rolled on, mutated, rebranded, reconstructed. There were decades when people danced on your grave, and decades when they tried to polish your memory into sainthood. The truth is somewhere between. A woman who wasn't ready, wasn't perfect, but wasn't the monster they made her out to be either. And maybe that's the point. Maybe your story doesn't offer comfort because it isn't supposed to. It asks us to look at power, at perception, at the fine line between privilege and punishment. It asks us how much a person is responsible for the world they inherit. It asks what justice looks like when the angry and the innocent are all caught in the same storm. It also reminds us how women are remembered, how quickly their stories are flattened, their agency rewritten, or erased. You weren't the only queen to fall, but you're one of the few who became a meme. And now, hundreds of years later, people are trying to undo that flattening. To reinflate the dimensions of your life, one detail at a time. It's happening in unexpected places. A teenager posts an edit of you on TikTok set to melancholy piano music. A grad student writes a thesis about your final days, analysing how the prison system of revolutionary France mirrored modern power structures. A little girl visits Versailles and doesn't understand why the grown-ups call you the bad one, because all she sees is a portrait of someone young and sad in a heavy dress. These are not the ways people usually think of legacy, but they count. You once said, or were said to have said, depending on who's telling it, that nothing is new except what has been forgotten. It's a line that feels suspiciously too neat, too clever, but also, it feels true. In a strange way, you've never been forgotten, but you have been misunderstood, over and over again. Maybe now, slowly, that's starting to change. No one's rewriting history to crown you a hero, but they're starting to recognise you as a human. And that's the thing you were denied most in your lifetime. And maybe that's where your story ends. Not with the guillotine, not with the grave, but with the slow, stubborn return of your humanity. The refusal to be boxed in by bad press and worse propaganda. The long-delayed understanding that you were a girl, then a queen, then a prisoner, but always, underneath it all, a person. So tonight, as the lights dim and the hum of modern life softens, let's leave you here, not on the scaffold, but in that quiet moment before, standing tall, chin lifted, something like peace settling behind your eyes. You don't know how you'll be remembered, but you know who you are, and that, in the end, is the only legacy that truly belongs to you. And now, as we drift towards sleep, let it all settle. The lace, the scandal, the guillotine, the gowns. Let Marie Antoinette become quiet again, not as a ghost pacing the halls of Versailles, but as a thought gently folding itself closed. You've just walked through a life full of spectacle and sorrow, misunderstood gestures and moments of aching truth. You've seen her dressed like a porcelain doll, only to watch the paint crack under pressure. You've followed her through ballrooms and prison walls, through myth and reality, and maybe, just maybe, you found a little bit of yourself in the noise. What do we do with a story like hers? One that begins with a coronation and ends with a blade? Maybe nothing. Maybe it's enough that we just remember, that we hold her name with more care than we were taught to, that we see the woman where once we saw only the wig, that we understand how a life can be both beautiful and broken, how a legacy can be cruelly shaped and then slowly healed. So breathe deep now, let your body relax into the mattress, let your jaw unclench, let the image of Versailles fade like fog at dawn. The Queen has done her last curtsy. The crowds have gone, the palace is still, and you're safe and warm and real. Close your eyes. You don't need a crown to know your worth. You don't need a legacy to leave something behind, and you don't need to understand it all tonight. Just rest. Marie would have liked that, I think.